I'll just start out by saying, I'm really glad everyone's here right now, but just as important, I'm glad that everyone online that's watching, probably over 100 right now around the world, as well as people that are going to be watching afterwards on the recording, because Web3 is obviously a very global culture. So it's not just about people that are in this building, it's about people that are contributing around the world. So I'd say as many of you know, it's a really special time for the graph ecosystem right now and the entire community. Literally, in that community, many tens of thousands of people across the globe that interact and participate with the network, just to make it a reality, like to make a previously hypothetical technology a reality. And we'll talk about what that means, but it's special for a lot of reasons. Like just the fact that decentralized technology is beating centralized tech in performance metrics across the board. That's pretty insane when you think about it. Not only is decentralization important for the world because of verifiability, transparency, a true ownership, and of course, realigning the grossly misaligned incentives of legacy systems, but it's just the sheer awesomeness that a decentralized indexing protocol made up of over 14,000 indexers, curators, and delegators is actually beating centralized tech. It's pretty crazy to think about. And it's really amazing that only half a decade ago, this was like all just an idea, right? Then an MVP, or let's say a white paper, then an MVP, and then beta, and finally launched in December 2020. And the ecosystem continues to ship very fast. Since the network launched in December 2020 up to this year, at the beginning of this year, only Ethereum was enabled on the network, so for 2 years. And in the past 2 quarters, there are now 7 chains enabled. There's another one coming soon, and it's honestly just the beginning for the decentralized network. So substreams are now live. If anyone's heard of that, it's the REST-based API that enables up to 100x indexing and syncing speed, which has been a friction point for developers in the past. And it's just setting the graph even further apart, or the graph technology even further apart from anything else out there. And then, of course, like what we're here to discuss today, right? What we're here to celebrate today, which is the journey of adopting layer 2 technology into the graph network to increase speed and decrease the cost of up to 25x in a normal basis for every participant. So every data consumer, subgraph developer, indexer, curator, and delegator. And we're going to start the day hearing from AJ Warner, who's the Chief Strategy Officer over at Off-Chain Labs, the team behind Arbitrum. So Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum Nova, he'll talk about all that. And of course, Arbitrum 1 is the layer 2 tech that's being integrated with the graph network, which we're going to talk all about. After that, we'll hear from a panel of some of the incredible folks at Edge and Node that are actually building this integration and making it happen. So diving in on what's going into the integration, where we are in the adoption roadmap, and then we'll have some amazing workshops from Livepeer, which will be virtual, so I will be connecting in. Rubicon Finance, Denver will be doing that. And those 2 dApps are using the graph for Arbitrum data and will be using the decentralized network on layer 2. So maybe they'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll hear from Banksa, the fiat on-ramp provider that the graph ecosystem really recently built into the graph network to just help make billing easier for developers and data consumers around the world, which is really just bringing the graph network closer to a Web 2 SaaS level experience, all while being powered by decentralized network and decentralized tech for unbeatable uptime and just unbreakable data. Existential in this time, crucially important at all times. And to end out the workshop session, we'll have a sneak peek at the layer 2 transfer tools that will enable all participants to smoothly transition from Ethereum to Arbitrum by our very own Pablo. And you won't want to miss that because it's actually the first time that this has ever been talked about like in a very public setting. Really, this is the alpha. So this is the first time we're ever talking about this in public, which is exciting. And to cap it all off in true Web3 style, we'll grab some drinks, maybe eat some more tacos, hug some friends, and then just kind of talk about the better world we're building. So let's kick it off. I'll get my ugly mug out of here and call up AJ from Off-Chain Labs.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? First of all, thanks so much, Kyle, for that introduction. Really excited to be here. It's an amazing day, both for the Arbitrum ecosystem and also for the graph, and it's been a long time coming. We've been working together for, I guess, more than 2 years. I think the graph indexed the Arbitrum testnet probably about a little more than 2 years now, and then last year with the announcement of the migration, and finally to be here today, it's really exciting, and it's great to see so many people, from the ecosystem, from the community, being a part of this. I'm AJ, Chief Strategy Officer at Offchain Labs. I've been here about 2.5 years building out the Arbitrum ecosystem, really from the launch of the testnet, focused on building out the ecosystem and growth in the community, working with developers across every infrastructure, DeFi, gaming, NFTs, and every other vertical in between. So I'd love to spend today to talk to you a little bit about Offchain Labs, Arbitrum as a technology stack, and then also the Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova networks, which are the public networks that are now in control of the Arbitrum DAO. We can talk about that a little bit too. There. So the story of Arbitrum as a technology actually goes back quite some time. So Ed, Stephen, and Harry are the three founders of Offchain Labs. The story goes back to Ed when he first read, when he was at Princeton, the first smart contract white paper about 2013. He said, there's no way this technology is going to scale using one layer without something we call layer 2 technologies. If we want it to remain secure and decentralized, there's going to have to be sort of a separation between consensus and throughput. And he dedicated his fall 2014 class at Princeton to building out like the earliest prototypes of what Arbitrum technology could look like. It's evolved a lot, obviously, over the years, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. But it's just always funny to go back to that moment. It's been basically a decade in mind and thought of how long they've been building this technology. The irony is it's before Ethereum even launched. So I remember I was speaking to Ed, and he said that the initial version was like on a fork of Bitcoin that can be able to have a smart contract layer built on top of it. And so then Ed went to the White House in 2015. He was Obama's deputy CTO, and when he came back to Princeton in 2018, it was the first time that Ethereum really could have congested. For those who were in the space at the time, the CryptoKitties phase was the first time that Ethereum had congested. And Stephen and Harry, who were PhD students at the time, went into his office and said, remember that thing you worked on 4 years ago? I actually think it's going to be vitally important to scaling Ethereum. We need to start working on the Arbitrum technology. And that's when they really started building it. So how do rollups work? And this is going to be, pretty generalized across a lot of different rollup stacks, and we'll talk about some of the distinctions. But the fundamental principle is that rollups, even though for those who've used Arbitrum or other rollups in the past, it looks like you're interacting with another blockchain. But what you're really is, you're interacting with a set of smart contracts that lives on top of Ethereum. And under the hood, what the Arbitrum protocol is doing, it's taking your transaction, batching it with thousands of other transactions that are occurring, compressing the data and posting them on behalf of the users of the protocol to Ethereum for the data to remain on Ethereum. Low cost, fully trustless, and drop-in compatible with the EVM. So if you're a developer, you can develop any application on top of an Arbitrum tech stack. Anything that you want to develop on Ethereum should work right out of the box on Arbitrum. But as a user, that's really the experience that you feel. It looks like you're using anything, but it's really just a set of smart contracts that lives on top of Ethereum. And the key thing, which we'll talk about in a second, we're going to get into the different trade-offs within the Arbitrum ecosystem of chains, is how does Ethereum know that the data that's posted by the Arbitrum protocol is true, correct, and complete? And that's where you see some distinctions between different types of rollups. So you've heard of, I'm sure, of optimistic rollups like Arbitrum and ZK rollups like the Polygon ZK VM, Starknet, etc. And the real distinction between these two systems is how does Ethereum know what is true, correct, and complete? What Arbitrum leverages is an optimistic rollup with an interactive fraud-proof system, which is designed basically when the validator asserts that what happened on Arbitrum state was true, correct, and complete, anybody has the ability to challenge that. And then there's basically what we call like a bisection game where we figure out what is this distinction that they have, that they disagree on. And it's all deterministic. So you really know if you're running a validator what the correct state is, the same way like an Ethereum fork would work. But basically anybody has the ability to challenge that state. One funny story before we continue. So in practice, this has not yet happened on an Arbitrum 1 mainnet. And the reason for that is, you don't really challenge unless fraud occurs. And the expectation that we have is in the future, the overwhelming majority of challenges would not really be because someone wants to be creating fraud because there's economic disincentive to do so, is if there's like a bug in the software and for some reason a validator triggers a challenge. But we did see a malicious action actually happen on the ETH POW network. So for those who are unfamiliar, after the Ethereum merged from proof of work to proof of stake, Arbitrum actually existed on two networks because there was a hard fork of Ethereum. And ETH POW, there were people who think this, this asset, the forked asset, had value. Somebody actually submitted an invalid state root trying to steal all of the ETH POW out of the Arbitrum bridge. One of my colleagues, Lee, was actually running a validator on ETH POW because he was curious if somebody would ever do this. And he challenged that invalid state root. There was about 1 million ETH, or about $6 million worth of ETH POW at stake. He challenged it and actually protected the ETH POW bridge. And it was really cool to see it in production happen because you don't want to really mess with a live network, but ETH POW is kind of that in-between testnet and main network. But the truth is that anybody who's running a validator has the ability to defend the network. And that's the assumptions of a roll-up, is if you're running a validator, you can protect the state. It was really cool to see in production. So just very briefly here, there's two types of technologies, Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum over the public chains, that use roll-up and AnyTrust technology. So I just described the roll-up technology. It has all of those features. But as we'll see sort of later on in the presentation, roll-up technology works really well for most use cases. There are certain use cases that need extremely low fees that are willing to make certain trade-offs that don't necessarily want to put all of their call data on Ethereum, right? Because those are like, that transaction might be cents. But there's some use cases that need sub-cent transactions. So we built Arbitrum Nova, or Arbitrum AnyTrust, and they share the exact same code base. There's one distinction between the two, and that distinction is, instead of posting your call data to Ethereum, do you post your call data to a committee of members, trusted members within the ecosystem who hold that data and post the certificates to Ethereum? We'll talk in further detail, but I just wanted to sort of set the stage of the different types of Arbitrum technology stacks that are in production today. So let's talk a little bit about Arbitrum 1, which is the network, obviously, that the graph is going to be migrating to. This is the difference between Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum and a typical sidechain. We spoke about this a little bit. So the data availability, all data that exists on Arbitrum 1, all those transactions are posted to Ethereum. For a typical sidechain, that's not the case. They have their own consensus. They store their own data with, some cases, headers posted to Ethereum. Bridging is another distinction. When you bridge into Arbitrum from Ethereum, it's not a trusted multi-sig in between. It's a contract that you're bridging into on Ethereum, and then it's minting on the Arbitrum network into the Arbitrum smart contracts. You can always call from Ethereum that bridge. You don't need to rely on the Arbitrum network. We've talked about the fraud-proof mechanism. And when we talk about the 51% attack, that's exactly what I was talking about on ETH POW. Anybody who's running a validator can defend against 100 malicious validators, basically doing the adjudication on Ethereum. So those are the core value properties of Arbitrum 1 and the roll-up technology, and all of those features are in production. So what does the ecosystem look like? So Arbitrum 1 being EVM compatible has made it really easy for developers to build on Arbitrum. From an infrastructure perspective, the graph has been building on Arbitrum, I think, even before it launched to users in July 2021. And all major infrastructure that you expect within an EVM system exists on Arbitrum. An Etherscan block explorer, Chainlink price oracles, RPC providers, really across the gambit. And then at the application layer, Uniswap, Aave, Compound, OpenSea, they all have instantiations on Arbitrum, and it's really about liquidity. But one thing that we've been seeing is there's a lot of use cases that never could have survived on Ethereum that are proliferating on Arbitrum. And I would say that the core use cases there are derivatives and options. The gas computation that they need would have made a transaction, let's say, a typical Uniswap transaction might be like $5 on Ethereum and 20 cents on Arbitrum. A GMX transaction, let's say, which is the biggest derivatives protocol on Arbitrum, those transactions might have been $100 on Ethereum because the amount of computation that they take, and they're still, cents, tens of cents in transactions. And that's been an ecosystem and a vertical that's really thrived on layer 2. And we've seen sort of a lot of the derivatives trading that used to occur on centralized exchanges really moving into on-chain decentralized perpetual protocols, or other forms of derivatives on Arbitrum and other layer 2s. All of this needs liquidity, and liquidity is an extremely important component of building out an ecosystem. We're very excited by the amount of adoption that we've seen from the Ethereum ecosystem and community about support for Arbitrum. So for some context, that at the top right is a count of how much ETH lives in the Arbitrum bridge. So there's 1.1 million ETH. If you look at the top accounts on Etherscan, it's like the staking contract. like the wrapped ETH contract, like Binance, and then the Arbitrum bridge. And obviously that doesn't represent the value of Arbitrum. It's the users, depositing their assets into the Arbitrum bridge to make sure that they're being used within the Arbitrum ecosystem. That liquidity is what powers, the experiences on Arbitrum. And I like to say, and I'm often made fun of for saying this, it's really a chicken and egg when you get to scaling, because we can build the best technology, we can work on the best technology, but if there aren't developers, applications, and users that are all participating in that adoption, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's about the user experience, the developer experience, and that's something that goes beyond just building the best tech. The ETH flows at Arbitrum continue to rise, and it's, I think, a function of the really organic ecosystem that's being built with really strong developers. This is sort of L2 beat, which is like the canonical, we trust what's happening in the Ethereum rollup space. Just tracking some of the market share that Arbitrum 1 currently has amongst its great competitors. So we're here obviously to talk about Graph Day. We spoke about this a little bit earlier. So the Graph and Off-Chain Labs and Arbitrum have been working together for a very long time. We've been working on the Arbitrum 1 indexing and querying. Again, that was June 2021, so before Arbitrum even opened for developers. And then I guess it's about a year ago, or February, that we really started focusing on scaling on the Arbitrum network and the migration. So I got some of these facts from the team, and we were looking at it. So the key facts, there's 173 subgraphs that are already live on Arbitrum. We want to see that number continue to grow. I think Ethereum is at like 900 right now, if I remember correctly, but we're going to get that number to continue to grow. And the issuance of rewards right now is mainly on Ethereum, but over time, in the future roadmap, is we're going to be migrating that to Arbitrum. So the indexing rewards, that issuance is going to continue to increase on Arbitrum. And like Kyle had mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the transfer tools that are coming live, about how there can be more infrastructure moving from Ethereum to Arbitrum within the Graph ecosystem. So this goes back to what I wanted to talk about regarding Arbitrum Nova. And one thing that we realized, particularly in gaming, is that the security trade-offs that game developers have are different than some infrastructure providers, are certainly different than some of the DeFi verticals. And we believe that there is not one tech solution that is going to be the answer from a blockchain perspective for every single use case. And what we were hearing from game developers is, we understand the security properties of Arbitrum 1, we understand the security properties of building a rollup, but some of those trade-offs are not worth it for us to not use a sidechain. And we took that as a call to action, is how do we build a better infrastructure stack that could be utilized by games built on top of Ethereum. And this is a collection of games that are moving from Ethereum or other ecosystems to the Arbitrum ecosystem. So Pirate Nation recently launched on Arbitrum Nova, Zverse, AI Arena, Forgotten Runes, which you probably are familiar. And I would say probably the most popular game on Arbitrum right now is the Beacon. They went live in November with their alpha. So this is a collection. This is really the reason why we built Arbitrum Nova. Arbitrum 1 has been really strong within the DeFi ecosystem. But there has been a lot of demand for a product like Arbitrum Nova because it actually has a lot cheaper fees. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how Arbitrum Nova transaction lifecycle works and compare it to Arbitrum 1. So on Arbitrum Nova, the sequencer takes those transactions and it batches them, and it compresses them. And on Arbitrum 1, what it would do is it would post that data to Ethereum. And that would, if you look at like an Arbitrum batch, is like probably amortized about 6 cents per transaction. The overwhelming majority of the cost of a transaction on Arbitrum 1 is actually the data that's posted to Ethereum. That is going to go down, hopefully, with the adoption of EIP 4844. But today, June 14th, that's what it is, right? The 14th, June 14th, 2023. The reality is that's the overwhelming majority of cost of using Arbitrum or any roll-up technologies, about 90% posting call data to Ethereum. So how does Nova change this? So instead of posting that call data to Ethereum, you post that call data to a committee. And that committee then posts the call data to Ethereum. So on Arbitrum Nova, who is that committee? Now it's controlled by the Arbitrum DAO to add or remove members of the committee. But part of the sort of the launch cohort with Off-Chain Labs when we were building Nova, it's a collection of Web 2 and Web 3 providers. It's Off-Chain Labs, Reddit, Google Cloud, Consensus, QuickNode, P2P, the team that developed the Lido protocol, and OpenSea. And the principle is and remains, as long as you trust one member of the committee, you should feel comfortable that your data will be available. And that's why I wanted to have a mix and match of who would be involved in the committee, because you might be a Web 2 developer and you have no idea who P2P is. So, you trust Reddit, you trust Google Cloud. Or you might be a Web 3 developer who hates Google Cloud, but I'm confident I trust Consensus or Off-Chain Labs or somebody else. So it was really important to have that collection. And the reason for that is because if a data certificate isn't generated, the chain can fall back to a rollup. And that's one of the big innovations over a typical sidechain infrastructure. Any of those members of that committee or any validator that's, it's the same thing right now with the committee and validator list, they can say either there's a malicious attack on this network, or we think that something is going wrong with this protocol software and we can't generate a certificate, we're actually going to fall back into a rollup. So the key innovation here is that progress continues until it's resolved. So the validator's disagreement you don't require 2/3 honesty amongst validators. You only need one honest validator who raises a flag and turns the protocol into a rollup until, in the Arbitrum case, the DAO can fix through governance how they want to readjust the committee. And we think that's a huge innovation. And the reason for that is because when you have a typical sidechain, you have to ensure that your 2/3 honesty assumption holds. So let's just do some quick math, right? If you have 20 validators, you need 14 honest validators to exist within the ecosystem. Well, let's say I want to decentralize that validator network. I want to go from 20 validators to 200 validators. Well, now you need to ensure that 140 validators are going to remain honest. If those validators, the additional 180 that you've added, turn out to actually be a cartel and are malicious, you've actually, by increasing the number of validators, have hurt the security properties of the protocol. In a Nova or any trust style architecture, that's not the case. And the reason for that is if you have 20 members of the committee, 20 validators, and you go to 200 validators, every added validator is additive, because as long as you have one honest validator that will force the protocol into a rollup, you can have confidence that the data will retain because it will be posted to Ethereum and that progress will continue. And we've been seeing a lot of adoption. So in practice, those fees that we see on Arbitrum Nova are basically sub-penny, because we've turned a typical transaction and removed, in the optimistic case, the most expensive component. The way we approach it, and again, they're both permissionless networks, is we're trying to build infrastructure that works for the use case. We never recommend, large infrastructure or DeFi protocols to launch on Nova when asked. And that's because usually those protocols can afford the added security of the Arbitrum 1 protocol of rollup technology, which is obviously in all instances superior from a security and decentralization perspective. But we've seen games in particular, and I want to talk about Reddit for a second, that this technology was important. So Reddit has been using the Arbitrum technology for about 2 years now. In July 2020, they put out a request for proposal. They want to start thinking about how do we scale subreddits on chain. And we want to hand control of these subreddits. I guess this is somewhat topical with all the stuff happening in the news, but we want to hand control over subreddits to the ecosystems, to the communities, and we want to start seeing how this technology. They spent about 10 months on Arbitrum testnet, and when they were thinking about the migration to mainnet, they realized the scale that they are talking about, Nova was an important option for them. And the reason for that was they were dropping to over 250,000 Reddit accounts on day one. So they started with a pilot with two subreddits, the cryptocurrency subreddit and the Fortnite subreddit. And it was 250,000 wallets that were eligible. Had they done that on Ethereum, it would have cost millions of dollars. Had they done that in this pilot program on Arbitrum 1, it probably would have cost tens of thousands of dollars. By using Arbitrum Nova, they were able to basically establish and fund these 250,000 wallets at the cost of about $1,700. And that's a sub-penny basically per account establishment, which is extremely efficient and in many ways necessary for their use case. It's really cool to see some of the innovation that's happening, particularly in the cryptocurrency subreddit. I think they're like requiring advertisements to be paid in like their moon token now, which they burn. It's like really cool. It's an extremely early experiment that I'm excited about. We'll see where it goes, but this is an example sort of the scale we're talking about and the use case that Nova has unlocked. And this is just sort of the committee that exists today that I was talking about. So that's a lot about the Arbitrum tech stack, the Arbitrum ecosystem in the public chains that is controlled by the DAO and the foundation. So what's new in Arbitrum land? So I want to talk about EVM Plus and what we're working on now at Off-Chain Labs. One thing to just point out and be extremely clear on, the adoption of the EVM Plus stylus protocol is on the public chains is totally up to the DAO and the DAO deciding on whether or not they want to incorporate it. Any other sort of layer 3 or other type of Arbitrum chains that are not governed, will be free to use this upgrade. But the principle here is we talked about the equivalence of, with Ethereum, making sure that the developer experience on Ethereum equals the developer experience on Arbitrum. We view that at Off-Chain Labs as the floor and not the ceiling. And what I mean by that is, we want to have the next million developers come on chain. The idea that all of them will learn Solidity or Viper or an EVM language is, in some ways unreasonable. And we've seen other ecosystems like Solana take advantage of that by offering Rust, Sui and Aptos with their Move, Cairo in the Starknet ecosystems. But all of those solutions have trade-offs in the sense that they lose a lot of the EVM community, they lose compatibility and composability with infrastructure designed for the EVM, and the ability to interact with EVM contracts. Stylus is intended to change that. And the way Stylus works is it's going to add additional programming languages into the Arbitrum tech stack that can be composable and synchronously interact with EVM contracts. And the way this works under the hood, I'm not the engineer in the room, but I'm happy to sort of share information that our team has produced, is there's basically two virtual machines working side by side. One is WASM-based, one is EVM-based, and they can interact with each other through the Arbitrum architecture. We announced last week that the prover has been built. So this, this optimistic prover that we always talk about, like how does Ethereum know that's true, correct, and complete? That's in production today. We have in test, not in production obviously yet, a prover that can prove both WASM contracts and EVM contracts simultaneously over Ethereum. And we're going to be starting with Rust, C, and C++ contracts that will be fully interoperable with Solidity. We think this is a huge breakthrough for onboarding new developers into the Ethereum ecosystem in particular, and are extremely excited about this. So I've been talking a lot about sort of the Arbitrum DAO and control of the Arbitrum ecosystem. We set up the Arbitrum DAO through the foundation about 3 months ago, and I'm extremely excited by the way it's designed. Unlike some other L2 systems, the way the Arbitrum protocol is governed is everything, even at the contract level, is controlled by the DAO. Everything, the corporate treasury, all the parameters that can be changed are all in control by the DAO. And the DAO's mechanisms, obviously you can vote. If you have Arbitrum tokens, you can either vote yourselves or delegate them to anybody else who's a delegate. But the mechanism that's in place to ensure that the DAO maintains control is they have a path of upgradability with a delay for any upgrades that go live. And they have control over a security council if they need to have an upgrade that goes quickly. So that if the DAO decided, for example, that we feel confident in the state of the technology, we don't want to have a security council in place that can have fast upgradability, they can burn that affordance. But there's a security council of 9 of 12 members of the community, and they're all public, to help in the event of a vulnerability if they ever need to exercise. But the DAO remains in full control of the public Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova networks. It's an incredible milestone to have community control. We're extremely excited about it. If you want to learn more about Arbitrum or Off-Chain Labs or any of the projects that are building on Arbitrum or developer documentation, here are some helpful links. And if you want to try out Arbitrum and you're on Ethereum, here's a link to the Arbitrum bridge. Well, thank you.
Maybe we open it up for questions, and I'll just bring a mic if anyone has one. I'll actually start it out, AJ. When you were thinking about optimistic, it was kind of the best and most developed solution at the time. Is that the end all be all, or have you all thought about what the next iteration would look like? Are you doing research on that? Love to hear.
Yeah, that's a great question. So So Stephen, our CEO, likes to say, if you look at his PhD work, you'd think that he'd be a ZK maxi. He's done a lot of work like intense in cryptography. The reason why we've used optimistic rollup technology is because we think that it provides us the most flexibility today. The costs of proving are extremely high, and the more that you introduce into the environment, the costs go up, right? So, for example, designing a prover around the EVM, which is a lot of different projects have been doing recently, like Polygon, for example, ZK Sync. In many ways, that becomes the ceiling, right? They've built this prover to prove the EVM. We've been thinking on our roadmap really for years at this point about how do we introduce additional programming languages? How do we have Rust and C, C++ contracts be interoperable Solidity contracts? It makes it much more challenging with ZK. That doesn't mean we're not researching it, right? So we've done a lot of work to research it. We like to joke that we're like the only major scaling solution that doesn't have the technology in our name, right? So Off-Chain Labs, Arbitrum, it doesn't really have like a tip to any specific technology. Like Starknet is obviously Stark's, ZK Sync, Optimism. So we, all great teams doing great work. We don't really have that affinity. We're just trying to scale without compromise on top of Ethereum. And we just think today, and probably the foreseeable future for the sort of the amount of flexibility we're trying to build into the tech stack, that optimistic rollup technology will remain, from when you consider all perspectives, the most reasonable. But again, really nothing against Z technology on our team. We've done a ton of research on it. It's just we don't think the technology from a price point perspective and a scale perspective is where we want it to be today.
Can you elaborate a bit more as to how, I guess, an honest prover, if you will, on the one side kicks it back, I guess, to the base rollup methodology?
Yeah, so I might, depending on how technical you need me to go, I might we can send you some docs after. But the high level principle is that there is the initial validator who has a stake, what we call like an active validator, posts an assertion to Ethereum that this is the state of the Arbitrum chain. And then you have a 7-day window where any other validator has the ability to challenge and say that that was not the correct state, this is the correct state. And they basically go through an interactive proof where they each say, okay, we agree on this state, on state A, we agree on state C. What is in between? Find state B. They can narrow down to a single item instruction where they disagree, and you can basically determine from the system, and this is the part where it's just a little out of my depths from an engineering perspective, how it's designed that you can figure out who is right. Does that help? Does that answer your question, or is it helpful if I send you more?
Well, does that specifically relate between the difference between what Nova? Sorry, I think.
Sorry.
Nova. Like, how does Nova resolve?
Oh, yeah. So the difference between one and Nova is all call data in Arbitrum 1 is posted to Ethereum by the sequencer. Right. So the sequencer is another actor within the system who's posting the data, and then the validators are asserting to the state.
But you're essentially saying I just need one honest actor on the Nova side, right?
That would be to fall back into rollup.
Can you walk into that?
Yeah. So basically, the way the mechanism is designed, if all of the validators agree and the data availability committee agrees to produce this certificate, that certificate is what holds the data, and the validators assert, and they post a certificate to Ethereum. So they'll post a certificate to Ethereum stating, we are holding this data. I think the parameter is they have a commitment to hold it, I think, for 3 weeks. Any node can call to that data from an API. So like all that data is accessible the same way it would be on Ethereum, but that's the commitment from that committee to be holding the data, and they post a certificate. I think the way we've set up the protocol is you need at least 2 validators to produce, 2 committee members to produce that certificate. If you can't have the committee members agree on the production of the certificate, any one member has the ability to say a certificate is not going to be produced. Let's turn this into a rollup. And then the mechanism going forward is all transactions will not be posted to that certificate. They'll be posted directly to Ethereum until, the way we've set it up with Arbitrum is the governance mechanism can kick in, figure out what the validator disagreement was, the committee disagreement was, and go back to what we call like the optimistic cheaper mode.
Thank
Sure. Hi. Thank you for walking us through Arbitrum's newest developments. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on ZK bridges that could potentially transfer the latest state from Ethereum to Arbitrum and vice versa, and how that might complement or change the role of Arbitrum's native bridge?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. So I see it probably. I know our team has been looking at this from a research perspective. I think it will probably be quicker to produce the ZK bridges in between like parallel L2s than necessarily between the L2 and L1. I think that the way our bridge is designed, it relies in some ways. And if you want to have all of these properties occurring within the L2, that you have to be using the optimistic prover on the L1. But definitely an area that's been looked at.
Thanks.
Hey, so you mentioned the biggest contributor to how much a transaction costs on L2 is actually the cost of posting the data back to L1. And then you mentioned the EIP 4844. Do you have an estimate on or an idea on what improvements you might get from that?
It's a great question. We had an internal call about our conversation on Slack about it today. We have a research team that's like fully working on this right now at Off-Chain Labs with. So for some context, there's obviously an EIP 4844 working group within the Ethereum ecosystem. A lot of core developers at Off-Chain Labs, who work on the Prism client on L1. Terrence in particular, my colleague, are very involved, right? Because the Prism software development is under sort of the Off-Chain Labs hood. I think the high level is, EIP 4844, they actually just changed the parameters. They're increasing the amount of size that the blob space will be. From what I hear, and again, it's not 100% clear, it's probably going to be somewhere between 50 and 70%. But don't take me for that, because it depends on like a lot of different variables, including, how much demand there is for the blob space, what the final parameters are, etc. But we're doing a lot of research to figure out like what are those costs, and then analysis on the role of any trust technology if those costs can actually get low enough. But I think that there's a lot of work still being done, sort of modeling what that will look like.
Thanks.
I'd have time for one more, if there is any. All right. Let's get a hand for AJ.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
coming in, AJ. All right, we're going to take a 5 to 10 minute break, and then we'll pop into the panel, which is going to be Simone, who's head of DevRel for EdgeNode, Pablo's on the smart contracts team, and then BK, who's a PM working directly on the UI product side. So we're going to hit a lot of different topics about layer 2, how, why, and what it's looking like going forward. Thanks, everyone. See you in 10 minutes. Your mics are on. Sit on down, fellas. Welcome to the office. All right. We're going to start. If anyone can hear me from outside. All right. We got a ton of stuff to talk about today. Mostly, why this transition's happening, how it's happening, where we are in the roadmap, and then where we're going from here. And each of you has a very different perspective. And there's so much work that's being done here. I really want to make sure people know what that's looked like from the perspective of the people actually building it, and then really how people can interact, when they can interact, and what that'll look like going forward. But to start out, I obviously know you all very well. I feel lucky to work with you just about every day. But let's open it up with some introductions, because everyone watching and here might not know exactly who you are. So go over your backgrounds, how you got here, and then give an overview of what you're doing at Edge and Node. And we can start closest to me and go down the line.
Hello. Oh, does it work? Hi, my name is Simon. I joined the space in 2017. I was building the front end for the protocol. Back in the days, it was called Melonport. It's now the Enzyme protocol. And doing that, we really wanted to be fully decentralized. Like 2017, that was already a big thing. And it is an asset management on-chain protocol. So like for me as a front end and the user experience focus, we needed to have charts, right? Like how did these vaults develop and the token price and so on and so forth. So, but that was not possible to do fully decentralized, or like it was very crazy. And then we discovered the graph and started to integrate with the graph very early on. And then later in my journey in Web3, I joined Edge and Node to work on the graph, on this amazing technology. And now I'm doing developer relations. And what I also did, fun fact, when we started to migrate projects to the decentralized network, we did a white gloving. So like all these projects, we reached out and said like, hey, we do everything for you. And then we just hand over the endpoint, and that did roughly maybe 20 of these. So I have a lot of experience of actually migrating to the decentralized graph network. Yeah.
All right, hi, it's good to be here. So I'm Pablo. I started it in Edge and Node as a member of the smart contracts team last year, and been working on this Arbitrum transition, the contracts for that. And then lately I've started transitioning to more of a protocol product manager role. So working more closely with BK and trying to help coordinate all of the effort that's going on into making the transfer tools happen.
Hi, I'm BK, or Brandon Kramer. I originally was kind of like headed on this path in academia, and went to a postdoc at the University of Virginia. And there I was kind of working with the NSF to scrape a bunch of open source data from GitHub. And in the process, got more involved in open source and Web3, and realized the graph is, whoa, the impact of this, and kind of thought, this might be where I'm headed anyways if I were to pursue that academic venture and kind of look for on-chain open access public data. So I made the transition to EdgeNode in January of 2021, at first as a UX researcher. And then after about a year, I switched over to the PM side, and I've been mostly working on kind of like pricing and payments and things in that realm since. And probably talk a little bit about subscriptions a little bit later today, which is kind of the main focus of the past 6 months or so.
Awesome. Let's get into some of the meat of the discussion, but let's start at the top, and then we'll drill down on some various topics. Simone, I want to start with you, because I'd say you probably have the most comprehensive experience of subgraphs and what people experience with it. And I mean, you've been building subgraphs for 3 or 4 years probably, and then that was at Melonport Enzyme, and now working, doing everything from high-level tech support, dev experience, and now kind of leading DevRel for the ecosystem. From your point of view, this first one's a softball, the second one might not. Why is the graph moving to layer 2 technology? But then what are some of the pros and cons of moving to layer 2? And what do you think people experience in that realm?
Yeah. So one thing actually that's very convenient already, and it's already shipped, is when the billing moved to Arbitrum, actually. So first billing was on Polygon, and the process was to load the billing balance to bridge GRT over to Polygon and then fill the billing balance there. And that it always took some time until the bridge was finished and stuff. And actually, I think it's some months already that we can now on Ethereum mainnet directly fill the billing balance on Arbitrum. So it's actually pretty magically, I think, that we can just say like, hey, here's some GRT, I have it on mainnet, and I want to top up my billing balance on Arbitrum. And then we just send it to this contract. And thanks to this custom implementation of the Arbitrum bridge, the billing balance is automatically filled. It's pretty cool. There is also a video about this from Marcus that we can watch online and see how this goes. Yeah, and generally, I mean, working with decentralized technologies, it's always a little bit, how to say, there are more steps involved, like because we need to sign transactions and bridge stuff over. But I would say overall, like using an L2 makes it, as Arbitrum, this is a great integration with Ethereum layer 1, makes it actually much easier.
Nice. And BK, what about you from your perspective as a PM on kind of the UI product side, and then really concentrating on, we work a lot on concentrating on data consumers, subgraph developers, all participants have really great experience. What are your thoughts? Maybe different or the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest lure of moving to Arbitrum is just the advantage of cost. Like, I mean, it's just so much more cost effective for all the participants. I mean, kind of thinking across the board, it doesn't matter if you're a developer that's looking to publish and upgrade on a regular basis, or if you're an indexer allocating, all of these things become cheaper. And I think the measure like 23 or 25x or something cheaper. Obviously, that's a huge advantage for not only that group, but I also think it's much more accessible for those kind of new users to the ecosystem. I know when I first was getting involved, wanting to delegate, the cost of transactions were often so high that it creates an obstacle to be able to delegate it initially. So I think it'll add advantage to get involved in that way, and there are obvious advantages for others in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that before people still obviously on Ethereum, they're paying $5 per transaction on a regular day, and there's a few different transactions. So now getting from, let's say, migrating from the hosted service to the network, as opposed to 30, 40, $50, it can be $1, $2, $3, which is really cool to see. What about you from the smart contract side?
Yeah, so obviously I think these things are also really important. But for me, coming from the smart contract side, what I find very exciting is that now that we're on L2, it kind of opens up the solution space for what you can do with the contracts and what you can do with the protocol mechanisms. Obviously, we are always going to want to be mindful of gas, but once you have very cheap transactions, you can start like expanding the kind of solutions that you can think of for things like the protocol economic mechanisms and the things that participants actually do on the network.
Nice. And what about the process of choosing Arbitrum in the first place? Right? Many people ask the question, and there are many amazing chains out there with really cool technology. So I know it was a community decision and it was partly technical when the ecosystem looked at the time, but maybe BK and Pablo, you were in a lot of these discussions on the research and technical side. And BK, maybe we start with you on just a high level.
Sure. Yeah. So at a high level, there were a number of advantages of using Arbitrum as the L2 for our scaling option. The biggest thing is that it's battle tested, kind of tried and true. A lot of developer activity over there already. And probably the biggest advantage, especially from somebody who's thinking about pricing and payments, is a very competitive cost structure and a clear narrative about what that cost will be long term. Members of our Graph Council were also instrumental in kind of like working with Arbitrum's team in the past and scaling other protocols like Livepeer. So kind of from the social and cost side, those were a number of advantages, but there's also some technical things that I think Pablo will probably talk a little bit more in detail about. The main two, I think, were WASM support or WebAssembly support and fault proofs. And I'll maybe hand it over to Pablo to talk a little bit about that and the other advantages that he sees from the contract side.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when we started talking about this, or at least when I joined the conversation, that was about February last year, it was, we either go for a CK rollup or an optimistic rollup. And at the time, it was clear that CK rollups were a bit further away from being production ready. And on the optimistic side, Arbitrum was the only one that had fault proofs in production and on mainnets. And I think that's clearly what ended up tipping the scale in all of the conversations and what made us kind of reach that consensus that it was the best way forward at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And changing probably gears a little bit, I'd love to hear more about what the transition to layer 2 means for all the different participants. And I think a lot of people are interested. So BK, from a protocol perspective, not even getting into participants yet, what's changing on Arbitrum versus Ethereum? And then, of course, if something's different, let's say billing or curation, what is different and then why?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, again, just to reiterate, the like payments pricing 25 to even potentially 300x eventually cheaper is the obvious huge advantage. I think there's also some more subtle changes. One that comes to mind is curation, as you mentioned. I think this will help increase or improve the developer experience quite a bit. Right now, the way that curation works on kind of the Graph mainnet is much more about like having this bonding curve. It's kind of complex. There's some risk involved. So in moving over to Arbitrum, we've kind of in the technical side, flatten the bonding curve. And that technicality isn't that important. It is more important that in terms of developer experience, it's much more straightforward, easy to understand. And as a result, I think this will kind of translate to better quality of service across the network because it's much more straightforward and easy to understand both from the developer and indexer perspective. Perhaps the thing that I'm most excited about, though, and I'm a little biased in this sense, is that we'll be moving into this this kind of beta test where we're testing and introducing subscriptions on Arbitrum. So basically what that means is that any subgraph that's on Arbitrum will have access to, first in this kind of smaller group, and then eventually to everybody, will have access to setting up subscriptions on Arbitrum. What that experience looks like is you'll access billing. You basically just need to have USDC on Arbitrum and know how many queries you plan to use on a monthly basis. You'll make 3 clicks and set up your account, and then you'll have a fixed cost for your queries over the course of the month. So that basically just provides a lot more price predictability, better cost estimates for your business or any organization that that's using a subgraph. But there's also a number of other kind of smaller advantages, more subtle things like being able to pay in stable coins, obviously, a number of analytics charts to understand your query usage over the course of the month, and even be able to kind of look at query limits or rate limits rather. And then a number of other things, kind of like being able to find out and understand how you use subscription keys within your dApps. So a lot of cool things coming on that. If you are interested in kind of trying out this and participating in this beta program, feel free to touch base with Simone, Kyle, or me, and we'll kind of get you involved. And yeah, love to have a wide number of users in the community test this out for us.
And you mentioned stables. What about credit card, bank account? Will it be, because what it needs to get to is SaaS level experience, Web 2 level experience. So what do you think that'll look like?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it's worth mentioning that the pay-as-you-go, or the original billing system that we have in place, will still be there. Payments in GRT will be, payments in GRT will be over there. We'll have USD for subscriptions initially, and then eventually continue on with offering Banksa. Banksa and fiat is available in the pay-as-you-go system. That will be added to subscriptions as well as GRT eventually. So we're really kind of taking steps towards that, in addition to offering a number of other upgrades like recurring payments, and things like that. I know everybody's pretty excited for recurring payments, which essentially leads to this experience where you set it up, set it and forget it, and you can get back to doing the things you love to do, like building your dApp.
Yeah, and I love seeing the pricing of, it's not only stable, it's extremely competitive, probably lower than they'd be paying in the network right now by a large margin. So that's really fun to see. And Simone, can you talk about what that means for like participants, subgraph developers, data consumers, and as things sit right now, what can people do? What's the process of doing that to move over to Arbitrum and layer 2, and what does that look like?
I think it's worth mentioning that it's already possible of today, actually, like a good while ago, to publish a subgraph directly on Arbitrum. And I think that's also what we do right now, and also with the new White Glove project, that we can directly publish a subgraph on Arbitrum, and I would highly recommend to do that. It's actually more or less the same flow, just on Arbitrum. So we need to have ETH and GRT on Arbitrum first, but other than that, it's very similar. But what I'm actually excited about is the bonding curve that's kind of removed, so that I think then curation will start to play a little bit a bigger role. Right now, like all subgraphs on Ethereum mainnet, we recommend to have like 10K GRT of self-stake in order to get indexed. But on Arbitrum, where the bonding curve is removed, I expect like there is much more curation going on, and then curation actually has this function of telling also consumers which are the high quality subgraphs, because we can just sort like which subgraphs have the highest amount of curation, and then we can go there, and it probably also moves quicker. So like the idea also of public good subgraphs, that subgraph developer don't query by themselves, but just create for the community. A good example is the ERC 721 subgraph. Like these use cases might become more often seen on Arbitrum, because like curation changes.
I love that the ecosystem's iterating on things like curation, and there are even some brilliant minds in the audience right now that are thinking through what that might look like 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So it's fun to always kind of see innovation, and it's never like it's never a set it and forget it thing. So I think everything will always keep innovating. And Pablo, you're going to be on the hot seat right now. I saved you for last because it's just a slightly longer discussion. I'm going to be grilling you for a bit, and this naturally flows into what you're all doing with layer 2 transfer tools, right, to make it smoother to move over. And that's a really important topic, so I want to dive in. Can you start by explaining just layer 2 transfer tools in general, and just at a high level, and what you're trying to achieve with them?
Yeah, so when you look at the protocol on mainnet, right now you have indexers that have to stake there, and then delegators as well, and you also have the subgraphs that are deployed through a contract on mainnet, and all of the curation happening there. So all of that is kind of state and GRT that is locked up in contracts, that you need to pay these like protocol taxes, that is you pay some GRT to do some of these actions. And if you wanted to move all of that to L2 and do it without any help, that means going through thawing periods and then paying for those taxes again and so on. So what we wanted to do is to make it much easier and having a more direct way to transfer the stake, all of the state and the GRT from mainnet to Arbitrum using the bridge and making it in maybe 1 or 2 transactions so that, yeah, you don't need to have these waiting periods and so on.
And like to dive in a little bit deeper there, where is that build out process in the roadmap? And then kind of what's it look like coming forward? And obviously I don't want to rug your workshop at the end. So I'd love to hear what you can share high level.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into more detail later, but right now, I mean, this has been developed for quite a while, and there's a lot of work from several teams, design, product engineering, and getting, so we have the contracts almost ready, doing the last tests, it's been audited and so on, and all of the other work, getting the product ready, is, I'd say, maybe 60-70% done. There's still a few things to do, and all of the testing and making sure it's ready. And as well, there are changes to the indexer stack that come together with this for indexers to seamlessly support the subgraphs that move from one network to the other. So I think all of this is coming together very soon. But yeah, we're not quite there, but getting there.
Yeah, I think, and I know you'll do a demo, I think it's worth talking through each participant. So let's start with kind of subgraphs. What are the subgraph transfer? What does that process look like? How does it work? Or how do you imagine it working when it's actually in GA?
Yes, so you have your subgraph in Studio. It's published, I mean, it's deployed and also published to Ethereum mainnets. And so you log into Studio, you see your subgraph, it says you can transfer it to Arbitrum. And then you have to click, you have to choose who's going to own that subgraph on L2, because you might own it with a multisig that doesn't exist in L2. There's like this kind of little details about the cross-layer communication. And then you just trigger a transaction, and behind the scenes, that's going to go through the Arbitrum bridge, and it's going to send that L1 to L2 message. And then when it gets to the other side, you just have to confirm and finish publishing that subgraph with a second transaction, this time in L2. So throughout all of that time, I mean, you've done these two transactions, maybe it's a few clicks, maybe. And behind the scenes, we're going to have indexers that are going to detect that the subgraph migrated and therefore start showing that they're indexing it on L2 because they're already like working on both layers. Yeah, at some point you update your query URL to the new Arbitrum URL.
Yeah, so it's only for published subgraphs. They initiate in Subgraph Studio. The bridge, let's say it takes 20 minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes. And then they still have to republish an Arbitrum after that transition takes place, correct?
Yes, that's yeah. Part of making it very safe to transfer was keeping that L1 to L2 message very simple, and that's what leads to needing to do that second, that publishing on L2 side.
And then all upgrading, versioning happens on Arbitrum. They just select the Arbitrum versus Ethereum in the UI.
Yeah, from then onwards, you have like on Studio, you'll have your mainnet published to mainnet. Also, it's published to Arbitrum, and then you can publish new versions there as well.
Awesome. And what about the curation? Does that transfer over when a subgraph moves over? How does that work?
Good question. So when you are transferring the subgraph, you are also transferring your own signal on that subgraph as the subgraph owner.
Just your own?
Just your own, yes. And this is
so it's in the same wallet, just the same wallet.
Yeah. So you have some signal that is owned by the same owner as the subgraph, and actually it has to be non-zero. So you could, if needed, just put one GRT there because this goes through the Arbitrum bridge and the GRT bridge that needs to send some GRT. But part of the Web3 ethos is ownership and people making their own decisions. So all the other curators on that subgraph would have to choose then when they want to send their signal to L2 or if they want to send their signal to L2.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what happens to the subgraph after it moves from Ethereum to Arbitrum? It's republished. Does that stay on Ethereum or does it deprecate?
Right, it's deprecated. So in order for this to be a proper transfer, and the fact that we're sending all of the signal, or we're sending the owner signal, but we're also sending all of the information about that version and everything to L2, then the L1 subgraph is going to be deprecated, but there is several things in place so that deprecation doesn't mean that the subgraph goes down immediately. It means indexers are going to have this updated stack that allows them to keep serving it for a grace period. And then the gateway is actually going to redirect any queries that come into the L1 subgraph to the L2 subgraph so that we can ensure there's no downtime throughout that process.
Cool. I didn't know that. What about the process for index or stake? Meaning, what are the differences there? And then if indexers kind of have to index on Arbitrum, what's the chicken and egg there for their process?
They can choose what order to do things in. So you can't claim indexing rewards until you actually start indexing. You allocate to a subgraph, you index it, you present the proof of indexing. And to do that, you need to have the stake on L2. So I think what's probably going to happen in most cases is you set up your stack, then you migrate, you transfer your stake, and then you just start indexing and start using that stack with the stake that you've transferred.
Okay. And then are there any differences in indexing on Ethereum versus Arbitrum, or is it just the same process?
It's the same process. What we're going to recommend is to use the updated indexer agent that supports both networks, because you don't have to transfer all of your stake at once. You might want to, as indexing rewards are moving from one network to the other, you're going to be sending some stake first and then, progressively sending more. So using that indexer agent allows you to run that very efficiently. And then in terms of if they're similar, it's actually the same process, just cheaper.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. And last question, hopefully, what about curation and delegation? Are those going to be similar processes, or are they different?
Yeah, they're all very similar steps. In the case of curation and delegation, those participants have to wait until either the subgraph they're curating to or the indexer they're delegating to has transferred to L2. And then at that point, they'll have the option to say, okay, I want to either send my signal or delegation to L2. If for some reason you don't want to go to L2, you can just withdraw your GRT on L1.
Yep. Okay. And then BK, how does it look like? How does it look in your world? Do you have anything to add? Anything you could share that you're all incorporating into the UI side of things that you all are working on that might be separate than what Pablo said?
Sure. I guess the main thing I would reiterate is just kind of the UI will kind of walk you through this process and make it fairly easy. When you go into Subgraph Studio, if you're familiar with that process, you'll see that publish button in the top right-hand corner. Right next to that transfer to L2 will be a nice little button to help you along, and you'll kind of walk through this process. The only thing I guess I would advocate is just kind of follow that process, and during that 20-minute break, take a nice little break, watch some Airbender, eat some ice cream, something like that. Come back, and you'll be set to publish. I guess the one other thing is, if you're on Arbitrum, just plug again, looking into subscriptions, making that process just as easy as possible, and go from there.
And then Simone, from a DevRel perspective, what are you and Marcus back there, Kevin, and everyone going to be doing to, where are they going to be videos? Are they going to be documents they can read? And where should they go to get all that stuff?
Yeah, we have already, I think today or yesterday, the Arbitrum migration FAQ is published on thegraph.com, so we can go there already. There are also videos, as I said, the billing is already created. Also, publishing to Arbitrum directly is created. For actually every step, there will be a video and thorough documentation that we can read through or watch. And then on top of that, obviously, we are always here. You can reach out in Discord or on Telegram, and if there are any questions, to help you through these processes. So don't be shy. We are here, happy to help.
Yeah. All right. I think we've hit a lot of meat and discussion. I want to open it up to a couple of questions, but first, let's get on with the softer side of what you're doing, what you're excited about, right? So, what are two things? One, I would want to hear what each of you is excited about, whether it's the Arbitrum Layer 2 integration or something else. What are you most excited about in the graph ecosystem? And then start thinking of what you're most excited about in the Web3 ecosystem in general. You can give them both at the same time, or we can go back and forth. Yeah, didn't know this was coming.
Do I need to start?
Yes, you may.
For the graph ecosystem, actually, I think I'm most excited about this billing the set and forget experience. I think that's one thing. Currently, people need to top up their billing balances when needed, but when we have really this thing of okay, I pay with stables, here they are, and this is how much I'm willing to pay per month, or I estimate, and then it just rolls. Like, that would be a big step forward. I'm really looking forward to this. In terms of Web3, I'm personally very interested in the non-financial stuff that's going on. It's actually a little bit maybe my theory, or maybe just hope personally, that we see much more of these use cases like decentralized social media, like Lens, or you probably know that I'm very much into POAPs, because I think it's like such a beautiful way of interacting with blockchain technology without any financial incentivizations. It's just fun and cool. So I'm excited about these use cases, which are like enabled also like with technologies like Arbitrum Nova. When the transaction costs go lower, that we have like much more of these use cases that are beyond finance and expensive NFTs.
Love it. Pablo?
Okay, I would echo what Simon said about.
You can't do that. You have to do
I'm
something.
gonna add. Yeah, don't worry. I have more things to say, but yeah, no, I agree. Those things are great, and I was gonna say billing and subscriptions. In terms of what's coming next to the graph, I think now that we have substream powered subgraphs, that's very exciting. I want to see what people start doing with that, and having more stuff built on substreams on the network. And then in terms of Web3, I also agree that non-financial applications and maybe things like governance are really, really cool. But from a technical point of view, what I would love to see, what happens with that is account abstraction, and how we start having more like seamless user experiences based on not having to sign everything in the same way, or like, having more control about your account and your identity by using a contract instead of just an EOA.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to see how that builds out and how that changes. And if it really enables people that aren't crypto native or haven't been in the space a long time to actually pop in and experience. BK, you can't use either of their answers, and love to hear yours.
Those are my favorite answers. That is what I've spent the last 6 months thinking about. So yeah, I'll kind of cheat and say, like, building on those things, I guess the thing that I'm most excited about in the Web3 ecosystem is seeing this kind of all play out, the real advantages of decentralization and how I think it will impact quality of service and pricing. Because the thesis that I have is really that, like, okay, if you see these, like, everything continue to decentralize at all the layers that it possibly can across the stack, we should see not only like that kind of ownership, but also quality of service and pricing continue to like increase or decrease in their respective terms. I guess maybe one thing I could plug within our own ecosystem is providing both of those things, like a better user experience and like subscriptions and billing, without relinquishing like ownership on the behalf of users. There's some like kind of proposals, maybe one including from Pablo, that really like provides the opportunity to think about like managed subgraph experiences, where a gateway or service provider can provide this like mechanism to publish a subgraph on behalf of a user, be able to curate, upgrade, do all these awesome things without having to own the subgraph. A user can still own the subgraph and pull that at any time and go to another service provider that have that flexibility to find better quality of service, to find better pricing. And I think that's ultimately what we want. That's part of the Web3 experience, is not to be locked in or like, I don't know, held hostage by a particular company. And I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I think it's important. I do think the network will win on performance and not Web 2 style contracts. And I think that's really important to us as an ecosystem. All right, let's open it up to any questions. There's a ton of experience on here. Would love to hear what's on your minds, even if it's not what we talked about. Web3, the graph in general, anything on your mind? And I'll bring you the mic if anyone has any questions. No one gets wine tonight if they don't ask a question.
I'm nervous. Okay. Great talk. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, great talk. Thank you so much. I'm just curious to know, Graph is, called Google of, Web3 and rightly so, but Google operates very differently, right? It just goes and crawls what it wants. It pulls the data, it chooses to index or not index, and it chooses to show you its version of truth when it wants to, right? So it's completely different, although it's the same nodes operating, index and crawl. with Web3, you have people choosing to use it so much. So I'm curious about how is the next growth phase going to happen to attract developers who want to use Graph? Like, like, how difficult does that look at the moment?
I think I can take that. So, I mean, the Google of blockchain analogy is a simplification that roots into the fact that both kind of index data and make it available. The graph currently is only queryable through GraphQL, which is, in my opinion, also like one of the best protocols to query for data, or like the best. But I'm a front-end developer, so I'm biased. And so that's actually where I think will also be like a lot of growth, because like before, when you want to have access to blockchain data, either you go to a centralized provider and ask for access to their, I don't know, SQL stuff, have immediately a vendor lock-in, and also you need to have SQL. But now when we have like these subgraphs published and they're like open for everybody to use, like when I talk to Web2 developers, they can just start to interact with Web3, like quickly do a dashboard with POAPs that are moving, or quickly do something about like how does it work on Lens, or like do algorithms on the posts that are posted on Lens. And that's just all enabled just by GraphQL, like a technology that they already know. They don't need to understand like Solidity, EVM, and L1s, L2s, L3s, CK stuff, like just GraphQL and you get the data.
And even above and beyond that, eventually something, what the ecosystem's thinking through, really through the Graph Foundation and Core Dev ecosystem, is something called the world of data services, that it can go into different languages, and it won't just be GraphQL. And there are even businesses building on the graph, like playgrounds, that you can use Python to download data sets and do data analytics. And then imagine when SQL is enabled to onboard really Web2 data analysts and so on. And that's just the beginning. So the graph ecosystem will likely be the place where anyone can come, any dApp can get any type of information, any language, maybe not any language, but I was just talking to Sam for Semiotic about that, about how that will look and how it's just like it being discussed in an R&D. So that one is not getting away. GraphQL is super versatile. It's probably the most like effective, like you said, but some people aren't comfortable with it. So expanding that would be really cool. And then it's thinking again what Sam and Semiotic kind of the MLRL, machine learning, reinforcement learning, and eventually using maybe even a chat GPT, OpenAI style no-code solution where there's natural language. And you say, I want to understand how many ENS holders increased from this month to this month, and it just auto-codes a GraphQL query or something else and spits out information. That would be extremely cool. And what's even cooler is that, as opposed to something on OpenAI, like all that's junk in, junk out, even though it's effective because there's a lot of information in what AI is doing right now in regular spaces. This will be based on consensus-driven information, verifiably true every single block, and that will kind of change the game of what the output will look like. And that's just right now when there's a lot of information in Web3, but imagine when people start building in Web3 in normal industries, TradFi, Web2, and so on. So it really could change the idea of digital transparency, information transparency, and just being able to trust and therefore really be trustless. So yeah, I think it's super early days. This is like these many years out probably, if not, 5-10 years. And they'll have to kind of rip me away from this because it's such a cool, long challenge that's kind of worth my time right now. I don't think I could be doing anything more important right now. Any other questions? Yeah.
Awesome talk, guys. Really appreciate it. So I've seen the graph take off from a dApp perspective, with DeFi use cases and other use cases. I'm curious, how are you guys thinking about it from an enterprise perspective? You're seeing more gaming teams enter the space, more brands and others. I know you guys touched on this a bit with subscriptions, but yeah, how are you guys thinking about it from an enterprise perspective?
Maybe I take that.
You take it.
I'd say that what the graph is tackling right now is public data, and that's extremely important to us, in not just to the ecosystem in general. We want Web3 values to be true, and some companies want siloed information, right? They want private blockchains, and that's okay too. Some will want that, but that's probably not what we're going to tackle. This is a big enough challenge, and there'll be more than enough data to be served to more than enough, even non-crypto native companies in Web 2, TradFi, and so on. That's as it sits right now. It doesn't mean that won't always be the case in the future, but right now, more than enough challenge. And then it's red pilling the world, I'd say, and enabling people to build on Web3 more easily, because the UX and DX isn't close to Web 2 right now. And so without the infrastructure being there, and without it feeling as good, if not better, than Web 2 user experiences, not a lot of people are going to port over. And so from an enterprise perspective, that infrastructure, what we're doing here, what we're talking about right now, needs to happen, or no one will want to come over to build on Web3 unless there's these niche industries and so on. So for the next really big dApps and killer dApps to be built, the infrastructure needs to be perfect, and that will lead to enterprise. And that's kind of a non-answer, because right now we have more than enough in front of us to take on things. But I will say that we are talking with brand name Web 2 and TradFi people and organizations that are already building in this space. And where I used to work, Goldman, when I was there, there was 5 or 6 people on the digital assets team. There's about 60 to 70 now, just in the few years since I left, and that's just in a couple years. And every organization's doing that, but they're doing it in private. And there are very few things they make public, because there's so much reputational risk for them. But they will eventually make it public, and I think they will eventually use the graph for maybe just certain circumstances, certain transactions, and certain data, which it's just going to be the more performant network. But Web 2 TradFi might always need some privacy as well, which more power to them, or not. You have anything to add there?
Yeah, maybe we can say that the Messari subgraphs. So the Messari joined as a core dev team to the graph, and they are writing these high quality subgraphs that are giving an overview over different verticals in the space. So for example, like lending protocols are all under the same schema that can be queried. And we see actually a lot of enterprise data consumers that are querying these subgraphs to get information out about what's going on the blockchain. But again, as Kyle said, it's about public data that is on chain, but there's already like a high use case. And also, I think like the data validity guarantees that the graph network provides are already quite good with the indexer attestations when they send a response to a query, but they even get better with researchers that goes into verifiable queries. So when you are a Web2 enterprise company that wants to have Web3 data, it's, in my opinion, much better to query the graph and get the data from there, because there is some data guarantees than just to trust like some data provider that might deliver the correct data or not.
That's a great point. So enterprises are already using the graph in a big way. There's 1 to 2 billion queries per day across 40,000 subgraphs, and most of it's via private servers, and enterprises will do that because they want to remain private. So a lot are already doing that through Messari subgraphs and through other things, just querying the hosted service and decentralized network. So it's really cool to see that even if they're going to do it in a private way, which it's mostly enterprises obviously that need Web3 data, because the world isn't living on Web3 yet. And I think it's becoming more likely that much of the world will, maybe in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Hey, thank you guys. On the infrastructure side of things, I'm curious how you guys are thinking about L2 scaling. Like, it's essentially like L2 software gets commoditized. How do you guys view L2 shifting to becoming like settlement layers on their own? And essentially, like, what's your guys' stance on the L3 narrative, and wanting to see, essentially like execution happening on these layer 3s? And how would that interact with like infrastructure services like the graph that are currently deployed to these L2 systems? When like it seems like the long-term roadmap for L2s is becoming their own settlement layers.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer it. I think, I mean, the risk with going to L2s and then L3s for me is fragmentation, and having good ways to kind of interact between all of these different networks is going to be very challenging. I would say the graph, in a way, behaves as a sort of L3 in itself. I've seen mentions of the graph as a sort of read-oriented rollup on top of, well, now it's going to be on top of Arbitrum, but actually on top of each chain that it is indexing in a way, because you're reading information, doing some processing on top of it, and then posting some result back into the network with the proofs of indexing. And there's some interesting conversations going on about, the graph taking its place as this sort of very weird special case of an L3. But yeah, I think I see that risk of fragmentation in general with L3s. But it's probably going to come down to how usable L2s remain when all of the transaction volume is on L2s at that point, and whether there are good ways of making all of these different layers interact between themselves.
Who might be the best person to answer that is probably in this room. I don't know if you want Zach, do you have any thoughts on that? Here, hold on. It's okay.
I usually take my time before speaking publicly. It's really.
We'll come back to you. All right, maybe one more question. And if not, we can call it and we'll do 10 minutes and a 10-minute break. Then we'll come back. Livepeer will be on, going over what Livepeer is, what the roadmap is, and we go from there. Thanks, everybody.
Is this bad when it's red?
No battery. Yeah, batteries.
Hey, Kyle. Hey, George. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hey, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem at all. Let me just share my screen. Sure. Yeah, sounds great. Thanks.
Okay. All right, we're going to have a presentation from Livepeer. Had to be tuned in virtually, but it's going to be some really cool information and maybe some information about the future. So let's let Suhail come in and introduce himself.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
All right. So everyone, hope you have a wonderful time at this event. And yeah, my name is Sahil, and I work at a developer relations here at Livepeer. And yeah, today I'm very much excited to share or have a workshop on building with Livepeer. So I would like to start with first. As you might probably know, 80% of the internet is comprised of video content, and this figure showcases the online prominence of the video and the online interaction. And furthermore, 65% of the whole internet traffic come from the video websites such as YouTube, Twitch, or even Twitter, and etc. And so the question would be, what makes the video so appealing and influential that 80% of the internet is video and 65% of the whole traffic come from websites? One of the key factors is engagement. Videos have a very unique ability to captivate the audience in a way that text or images often struggle to achieve. And for example, with dynamic visual, audio, and storytelling elements, video creates an immersive experience to resonate deeply with the viewer. And beyond engagement, the versatility of video content is another significant advantage of it. Video can be served on multitude of the purposes, for example, for entertainment, for education, marketing, and behind that. So whether you like to entertain or inform or pursue or inspire something, video offers a powerful medium to convey your message really effectively. And moreover, video have a remarkable ability to establish a personal connection between the viewers and the creator or the brand. For example, by leveraging the visual and auditory, videos can evoke the emotion, build trust, and foster the sense of authenticity. And considering these factors, it is clear that video is not a trend, but more like a vital component for our online experience. However, the crucial part to acknowledge is that it can be very, very expensive to create and optimize for a seamless playback across various devices and platforms. One of the primary costs in video content is the need for transcoding. Transcoding is basically a process of converting raw video files into different formats and sizes to ensure a smooth playback and provide a seamless viewing experience. Depends whether the user has a good internet speed or not. And it's also, we have to make a note of it, that transcoding can be resource intensive and also time consuming, adding the overall cost to the video production. And this complexity of the video process, coupled with the need of the specialist softwares and hardwares, contribute to the expenses involved in creating videos that are compatible with various devices and platforms. So this is where Livepeer come into the play. Livepeer is a global, open, and decentralized video infrastructure network with a distributed networks of nodes. Livepeer ensures high availability and reduces latency, providing global video infrastructure for audiences. And basically, Livepeer, as I mentioned it, it's a decentralized and it ensures the reliability. It is completely blockchain agnostic, so it really doesn't matter which blockchain you will use, or even if you would like to use any blockchain. So Livepeer has a SDK or REST API which you can use it without interacting with Livepeer smart contracts. And some of the applications which are powered by Livepeer are Huddle 01, Beam, Bonfire, LensTube, Orb, and many other decentralized applications which uses Livepeer for as a video infrastructure in both their websites or mobile applications. The Livepeer Gateway Service and SDK provide the video on demand, live streaming, delivery, recording, transcoding, multi-streaming for over 2 million plus minutes each week. And you can learn more about the stats, the transcoding, nodes, orchestrators, and all from explorer.livepeer.org, which is using the subgraph, the Livepeer subgraph, to fetch all the information. So now coming to the next topic, which is who is Livepeer for? Livepeer is basically for the developers who want to build an application that include a live or on-demand video or multi-streaming. They can use Livepeer to power their video functionality, or it can be used by the broadcasters such as Twitch or YouTube streamers who have a very large audience from the different countries and very high streaming bills and infrastructure who cost basically which can be reduced at their cost by using Livepeer and the infrastructure overhead. And besides that, Livepeer is also for the users who want to stream video gaming, coding, entertainment, or educational processes on the type of the dApps or application which basically they built with Livepeer. Livepeer has many functionalities such as video on demand, live streaming, multi-participant streaming, video token gating, NFTs, and etc. But in this workshop, we will be covering mainly three, which is the VOD, video on demand, live streaming, and playback from the IPFS. So starting with Web3 video publishing or the video on demand, it takes this process in order for the from the starting to the end point when the video is being uploaded to the Livepeer. So it starts with the pre-process of getting a standard video format, control the video size, and also encrypt the video file. Next, if the user wants, they can also upload it to IPFS or Weave storage or any other solution, storages which they are comfortable of. And the next, Livepeer process this video and generate the transcoded version of it. Once the video is transcoded, users can basically mint an NFT or specify any access control which they want, or just post it on their social media accounts, like in the Lens protocol. And finally, there's also Livepeer Player, which handles the video caching, playback from the D storage, and also content verification. And finally, there's a data analytics, which you can get the viewership of your video, the playback performance, and etc. The next is the video broadcasting or live streaming. This has a very similar, but a few steps is basically different. The first one in the live streaming is video ingest, which basically gives the video supported format like RTMP, SRT, WebRTC, and etc. Then Livepeer pre-process the video for video transcoding, recording, or multi-streaming. And again, in this case, also the users want to create a social port or access control their videos. And finally, they can play back the video using the Livepeer Player, and then they can also get the video information such as the viewership and playback performance. Livepeer also has a JavaScript SDK, especially for the React or Next.js application. It makes building with Livepeer very effortless. It provides a core vanilla JavaScript library to easily connect with the Livepeer provider, for example, Livepeer Studio, and as well as the React-specific hooks to build the memorization and DOM management. It is quite easy to interact with, and yeah, so if you're building any application which uses React, Livepeer JavaScript SDK is the best option. However, if you are building an application which is using a server-side or any other application, any other language which Livepeer SDK does not support, you can use the Livepeer REST API. Livepeer API is an organized REST API which has a predictable resource-oriented URLs. It accepts the form encoded request bodies. It returns the JSON encoded responses, and it uses the standard HTTP responses for authentication and works. And you can access the Livepeer API reference from docs.livepeer.org/API. And yeah, this was some slides about Livepeer, how it works. And now I'd like to take some time to show you a demo of how to build an application with Livepeer. So as assume that if you're a developer, you would basically use a Next.js application. So I will quickly create a Next.js application, and we will basically, let's create it. We don't want TypeScript in this case. We want Flint, we want Tailwind CSS, and I think for now we don't want to use the app router. But yeah, if you have a production-ready application, a router option for Next.js would be the best option to go with. And now that the video is basically the Next.js application is building, you can head over to the livepeer.studio, which is livepeer.studio, and you will be redirected to this authentication page where you can either create a new account or sign in the state. Currently, the only broadcasting provider is Livepeer Inc., but in the future, you'll also have an option to provide your own provider or use the other providers. So I already have an account, so I'll just go ahead and quickly log in. And yeah, once you are here, this would be the dashboard for Livepeer Studio. Livepeer Studio is basically an open source dashboard for interacting with the Livepeer API. And yeah, so as you can see now, the Next.js application is completed. We can open it up, grab workflow. And here we can run npm run dev to start the application. All right, so now that the application is run, we can go back to our browser and go to localhost port 3000. Remove this URL from here, and yeah, so as you can see, I have a very Yep. So in the port 3001, we have a simple Next.js application, which is basically generated from the Create Next app. And yeah, so in this workshop, I'll be just covering a very small topic of playing back a video from either IPFS or READS. So yeah, now that we have created the Next.js application, we can quickly update the Tailwind config first. So I already have the phone files, so I just added here the primary and secondary, and yeah. So, but this repo is available on the GitHub, so if you want to clone it, you can directly do it. That would be much easy. And finally, I can have an image here on the public, and yeah, that's it. Now we can come back to the pages and index.js. So this is the main file for you to yeah, build an application. This is the index file for the Next.js applications. So I'll remove this one, and for now I can just write here. And as you can see, we have it here. Next, let's come back to the styles, global.js. So here we want to clean up everything, and also add two other style files, which is from our fonts, which is the Satoshi and Cabin font. So I just quickly add them here as well. And yeah, once we have the style files, we can come to the app.js, and here we can import both of those style files. And yeah, that's it for the setup. Now, if I open up here, we just have a very simple application. And now what I would like to do is just update it and make the app a little bit nicer for it to look. So let me just zoom it in. So here I can create a div with the class name of relative flexbox, and we can give it a minimum height of the screen, and flex column. We want the items to be in the center of the screen. And you can also keep the justify content center, and if there's any overflow, you can hide in it. And finally, if you want, you can also add a background. In my case, I just want to add a very light shade of the gray. And finally, some padding. And next, I already have image files here, which yeah, you can get them from the GitHub repo. So I just add a very simple background, and then another simple grid background. So now here we have our main code, which we can add mainly the text files or any components. So here I can, for example, write playback a video from IPFS or Orbis. And we can also give some style to this text. And finally, wrap it inside of div. And if I save it, you can see we have a playback from video. We have a very nice background with a gray color and some grids. But yeah, this is how it looks right now. So now we want to basically make sure that this is on the center of the screen. Write this class name. And yeah, so next what we want to do is add an input here, which users can users can add an IPFS or Orbit CID, and then we can play it with the Livepeer player. So I'll create a div here, and inside of it, I can add input of, for example, IPFS CID or Orbit hash. So you can see we have the player here. It's not visible properly, but we have it here. Now we can update it a little. This. And yeah, give it a background of 200. Right. So now we have a very small input with text. Now we want to make sure the styles. I don't want to make this too complicated for styling and etc. So yeah, just want to make sure it is as simple as possible. And yeah, so here we have a text and some video. Let's make sure that the text is aligned properly. So I can give a margin top of 20 and a margin left of 20 as well. Maybe FT will, let's try with 40. Yeah, I think for now it's good. But again, yeah, you can just add an align center and it should work properly as well. And yeah, I think for now we are good. We have a text and we have an input. So maybe let me give it, yeah. So here you can see we have a text. Let me just make this white so it's clearly visible. Yeah, so we have input with a text. Now this is the input which users can basically type any IPFS CID or Orbit transaction hash. And here we want to put the Livepeer to play back the video from the D storage. So now that we have our simple Next.js application running, we can go back to the Livepeer docs, and here the first thing which we need to do in order to use the Livepeer.js is to install the package, which you can do by npm yarn or pnpm. So I can quickly run npm install at livepeer/react, and once you have it installed in your app.js or index.js, you have to import and create a Livepeer client. So let me just quickly do that. We can create a client and finally wrap our application with Livepeer config. And yeah, so here we have added a Livepeer config imported from a Livepeer/react package, and we also have specified a client. So here we can just use this client from here and get sedu. So coming back to the Livepeer.sedu, you can go to the developer section. Here you can find API keys. You can click on create an API key, give it a name. For example, in my case, I'm just going to give it graph workshop. And you can also allow course access. In this case, I want for everywhere, but if you're building an application, you can just put your domain name and yeah, copy the API key. Save it. And yeah, we now have the Livepeer client ready. So the next option would be to use the Livepeer player to play back the video from IPFS. So let's come back to the home page. And here, what we can do is we can import the player component from React. So I can say import player from React. And we can also import, yeah, I think for now we are good. And finally, we can just add a player here. Yeah, here would be a good place to add a player. So we can just say player. And we can give a margin top of 10. Yep, it should look good now. Let's also add a relative here. Finally, we can add an overflow. Yeah, perfect. So now we have a Livepeer player here. So for now, it doesn't have any, we did not pass any CID or Orbit, so that's why it's just in the loading state. But first, let's make sure it is aligned on the screen. So yeah, perfect. So here, what we want to do is when the user type IPFS CID, we want to play the video here. So for that, we can first create a user state. For example, the storage ID, which stands for decentralized storage ID. And we can have a user state of a string. And next, what we can do is on change, we can set the value to set the storage ID. And finally, in the player, we can basically put SRC for that URL. And in our case, it's going to be URL, so users will be putting IPFS link. We can player also accept the autoplay or muted and etc. So let's replace this with a storage ID. And yeah, let's also bring one final change. So we want to make sure the player is visible only if there's a storage ID. So we can do it like this. Yeah, good. So now we have this web page. We have a text and input, and here we want once we put the IPFS CID, we should have the Livepeer player playing back the video from the D storage. So completely optimal. So the Livepeer will play back the IPFS CID from the transcoded version, basically from the Livepeer CDN. So it will provide the best viewer experience. So now here we can just get the IPFS CID. So I have this IPFS CID here, and if I put it in this input, you can see the Livepeer player is playing back the video instantly. While if we open the IPFS CID, for example, on a web page, it could take maybe 1 second or 2 seconds, or maybe for a 4K video, it could take up to 2 seconds. But yeah, with Livepeer CDN, it should display back the video at the same time. And yes, that's it for this workshop. If I went any fast or anything else, please let me know. Like if you didn't understand anything. But yeah, that's it. If you have any questions or anything, please let me know. And yeah, it was great. I'm looking forward to see more from more innovations on the graph and the decentralized infrastructure. If you have any questions or etc., please let me know.
He can't hear us, right? Anybody have any questions that we can send over in Telegram and he can answer? And it's, by the way, if you didn't see, it's 3:30 a.m. his time. What a trooper to be doing that. Yeah. Tell him everyone's clapping for him.
Yeah, I was very much excited for this event. So yeah, it's already 3:40 a.m. here, but yeah, no problem at all. I'm very much glad to be here.
Awesome. I guess you can hear us. One thing that is cool is that this camera right here, we're actually using Livepeer, and we'll be using Livepeer at pretty much every Edge and Node event. So kind of the House of Web3 is wanting on Web3 tech, which is why we're also using Unlock Protocol for registrations, and hopefully we'll be implementing more stuff around there. And that's cool because, like you were saying, it streams directly to YouTube. It can use different things. So it's really versatile and not too hard to set up. Suhail, thanks so much for staying up late. Look forward to seeing you in person one day soon, man.
Yeah, no problem at all. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
All right, thanks, bud. We'll take a second. We're going to set up the presentation for Rubicon. I'm going to round out some folks that wanted to see it, and then we'll start in a couple minutes.
everyone. My name is Denver, here with the Rubicon protocol. We're here today because of our collective commitment to the cause of decentralization, a term that emerged from the French Revolution, an idea that has been the prominent driving force of a majority of social, technical, and financial progress during the past 3 centuries. Our attempts to progress the cause of decentralization is through the creation and dissemination of blockchain-based technologies. I believe the core idea behind decentralization is a belief in humanity and a fundamental distrust in people, learned time and time again throughout history. We're not the first to believe in our ability to cause revolution, to bring forth a fundamental change in the structure of human coordination, but we are among the first to have a path forward that doesn't require people to lead this change. Protocols and platforms built on top of blockchains are already enabling the human coordination towards collective goals. I believe this trend will only continue over time. And while our cause is young, started about 14 years ago by a white paper, is already shown the sparks of something great, a fundamental change in how we coordinate collectively. Rubicon is a simple idea to progress the decentralization of global finance through the implementation of a credibly neutral, fully on-chain order book. An order book is a really simple concept. Everyone can place offers indicating the asset they want to buy or sell in exchange for another asset at a set price and for a set amount. They aggregate all these offers together and match them when 2 people want to buy or sell something at the same price. This simple structure allows for a collection of information regarding the value of all assets and, more importantly, the intent of those people. In traditional finance, order books are everywhere, whether it's Binance, the New York Stock Exchange, or StockX, which is a way to trade shoes online. We've seen order books proliferate the traditional financial system. But sadly, they've become grossly filled with middlemen. When you think about the average person in the United States trying to place a trade, the user must first go to a brokerage firm, whether that be E-Trade, Robinhood, any other trading platform online, which is then passed to a clearing agency. They simply say this is a correct order and it matches the format they expect. That is then sold to a market maker who has direct access to the order book itself. And we're not going to get into how you become a market maker in the traditional financial system because it's long and convoluted, but there's a lot of regulatory barriers and a lot of money to be spent to do so. Finally, the user's order finally hits the exchange where it's matched with the counterparty, and then the depository trust and clearing agency transfers ownership. There's a whole traditional financial system that is based around this that extracts a lot of value from the end user. It happens millions of times a day, pennies on every single person's trade, and it doesn't create any value. Matt Taibbi described this as the vampire squid, a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. It's a crude example, but it explains in a brief sentence how extractionary these systems are today. And so, with the backdrop of traditional finance and the path forward of smart contracts, the idea of Rubicon started in the height of 2021 to transition all of global finance on-chain. But the issue was there wasn't a protocol that could facilitate this transition in the long run. Again, the beauty of order books is that they aggregate ideas and intents regarding the value of an asset. And that's why you see such a power law in exchange when it comes to volume. The exchange with the most information has the most impact on price. And automated market makers, by design, simply cannot take in outside information. I think it's worth stopping and saying, like, why did we go the AMM model in the first place? And it was simply a byproduct of the constraints of the system of the time. Layer 1 was and still is prohibitively expensive for order books. An order book needs to update offers on almost a block-by-block basis to reflect this true world value. And because of that, it was too expensive to constantly update their liquidity curves. So AMM emerged in this compute-constrained environment to solve the need of exchange. Luckily, Ethereum's going through its dial-up to broadband moment. The fact that we're here today talking about the graph transitioning to Arbitrum is testimony to that. And just as over the past 2 decades, the internet compounded bandwidth to enable access of all of humanity to it, so too will blockchains continue to compound block space to now enable widespread access. And this is why Rubicon is possible today. So in September of 2021, Rubicon was the second DEX on Optimism. And after 18 months of learning, we've come to a point where we're proud and happy to announce Rubicon V2, what we believe will be a credibly neutral order book protocol that can scale to the next billion DeFi users. Rubicon V2 builds on the underlying core market of V1 in 3 simple ways. Batch functionality, the ability to update multiple offers in a single transaction. A change in fee structure where the supply side of the network is directly paid out for providing value to the network in and of itself, and a spot margin trading system that allow users to get increased exposure to assets of their choice. Starting with batch functionality, again, over the past 18 months, we learned a lot about what it means to market make in a high gas cost environment. And just as layer 2s lean on batching for scale, so too does Rubicon when it comes to market making. Batch functions let you place hundreds of offers in a single transaction, cancel those offers, and even update them all in one go. And when you step out a bit and think about where are these layer 2s going, in a world where you're processing hundreds of thousands of transactions a second for all of Ethereum, when you then can do hundreds of offers in a single transaction, that's an order book protocol that's capable of processing millions of messages per second. This isn't just on par with centralized exchanges, it's exceeding them. That's why we believe an order book protocol in the long run is the only true way that you can meaningfully detach yourself from the needs of centralized exchange efficiencies. Next, we updated our fees. We're paying 95% of the fees of the protocol directly to the sell-side network, those who are providing offers on the order book and providing a service to the market in and of itself. When you look at fees in traditional finance, you see this really gross pattern of fee tiers emerge. Looking at one of the largest centralized exchanges, you see they have 9 different fee tiers. This is inherently centralizing. Those who have the most volume on the platform have an inherent advantage over the smaller players. At Rubicon, there's 2 fees. The taker fee, which is what you pay whenever you execute a swap, and the maker fee. The maker fee is set to 0, and they get, again, 95% of that taker fee. Whether you're a high-frequency trading shop in Chicago or a high schooler in Taiwan, every Rubicon user is treated the same. And in practice, this has a really interesting implication on market makers. Whereas on a centralized exchange, you're charged proportional to the amount of volume that you're placing. On Rubicon, you tend to operate at a somewhat fixed cost based upon the amount of transactions you need to place to execute your strategy. We don't have to deal with spam filters by simply charging people for the offers they're placing. Gas does that for us. And that's one of the beauties of an order book, that you can treat it as a common good resource that provides value, and that you don't extract value from users who are utilizing it, but you provide it back to them for doing so. Past that, like I said, we're excited for spot margin trading. The new revamped money markets of Rubicon allows for an over-collateralized lending system that allows you to short and long assets of your choice. It's fully permissionless, and there's no centralized actor that's having to deal with liquidations, manage accounts, things of that nature. I think past just the idea of spot margin trading and the functionality that that brings to users, I'm really excited that we're bringing leverage with transparency. Throughout 2022, it's evident that a lot of these centralized players got a little out of hand and got burned for it and took down the rest of the industry with them. I don't want to get into FTX and Alameda and how it's a perfect case study of why we need on-chain order books. I simply want to say that I'm proud that we're building a fully on-chain protocol where no one but the users and the smart contracts they're making an agreement with have control over their funds. So as we wrap up our V2 audit, we're excited to bring these new features out, to overhaul the existing protocol, and to also launch on new chains. Since its inception, Rubicon's been an optimism native DEX, and we've refined our stack until this point in time. And our next network that we'll be launching on is Arbitrum. We couldn't be more excited to be a part of this ecosystem. It's clear that Arbitrum is pushing forward the case of infrastructure when it comes to layer 2 scaling, and we think it's where the next billion DeFi users are going to be. We're excited to be a part of this ecosystem and can't wait to launch publicly on this network. Along with this past 18 months of learning about how to build a protocol, we've learned a lot about what it means to build a scalable dApp. And mainly, we've learned that it pays to scale with the graph. We've been able to build a decentralized application that is solely reliant upon subgraphs and a connection to the chain. This does away with our centralized backend and saved us a lot of money when it comes to RPC costs. So before I get into other ways that the graph has great synergies with order books, I want to first just show you our application today and what it has to offer. So everything you're seeing here is either provided by a subgraph or by connection to the chain. It enables us to have a year worth of order book data, all by simply scrolling through. And we really leaned into the idea of event-driven development. We recently published an article about this, and we think it's a great practice that other protocols can lean into when it comes to building decentralized applications. So again, from the candlestick charts to the past offers to the order book itself, all of this is powered by subgraphs. It scales to new networks as we launch in new networks, and it provides a truly decentralized approach to building applications. As well, it allows you to, the Rubicon protocol allows you, like I said, to place limit orders. It's really simple. I want to sell ETH, let's say at a price of 4,000, because I really don't like selling ETH. I'm only going to sell BIT because, again, I don't like selling ETH, and that's it. You place the transaction, it gets approved, and then once that goes through, the subgraph on the other side picks up the underlying smart contract event and populates in the order form itself. And just like that, the new offer is placed and it populates up into the order form. This is thanks to the graph and our focus on event-driven development. And also something I didn't mention is this includes V1. I think we see in this space a lot of protocols come in and do a big upgrade and fragment users because of it. Their front-end application now has two. You have to choose, am I a V2 or a V3 user? And it doesn't have to be that way. You can have data congruity across your contracts and utilize proxy upgrades to seamlessly pass on the user to the next version of the protocol. DeFi needs a UX upgrade, and we think leaning into subgraphs and event-driven development really provides that. So outside of just the dApp itself, we think that the graph has great synergies when it comes to the ability to have order book data. Order books are a really data-rich system. They, again, include everyone's intent on the value of an asset, going back into history and at the current time. And when you look at the traditional system, the New York Stock Exchange is getting 40% of its data just from 40% of its revenue just from selling data. This is a $2 billion industry for this company that sells it to a simple dozen individual firms. This is, again, centralizing. A lot of these trading shops are dependent upon access to this data to make their models, to refine them, and to then go out and do what they do. And the fact that it is centralized, you have to pay for it and have priority access, doesn't help anyone. It decreases competition, doesn't promote the market. That's why we're excited that the graph helps to unlock order book data on chain. Through its decentralized model and infrastructure, we are able to provide anyone equal access to this data, and something that we're excited to continue to do going forward. And with that, we're really excited to be both an indexer, curator, and subgraph developer in the future on the decentralized network. We focus on making all of our subgraphs event-driven. You don't need an archival node to index them. They're really lightweight and really fast. And again, it helps to disrupt this traditional financial model of exclusion. When only a dozen actors have access to your data, they have an inherent edge over you in the market. Order books should, again, be common good resource where everyone has fair and equal root access, and the graph provides the infrastructure needed to disseminate that information accordingly. And so, in what's to come, we're really excited about Ethereum scaling, whether it be the layer 2 networks themselves and major upgrades, optimism with Bedrock, Arbitrum with Nitro, or bigger milestones like EIP 4844. All of these increase the availability of block space, the throughput of these networks, and increasingly make order books a more efficient system. Like I said earlier, in a world in which you are doing 100,000 transactions per second and you're batching hundreds of offers, you're on par and sometimes exceeding the efficiency of centralized exchanges. This is a world in which we are committed to help build and excited that there are such strong ecosystem partners pushing that forward. Past that, we're really excited about progressive decentralization. You know, these protocols at the end of the day are just an aggregate of the people who use them. It's the community that really creates the value of them. And we're committed to handing over ownership of the protocol to the users of it and of itself. And I think MIPS in the graph was a great example of this. It wasn't incentivized usage, it was incentivized learning. You promoted people to become independent actors within the ecosystem who could actually make a profit for themselves, showing that these protocols create value and don't just make it out of thin air. And so in the coming months, we're excited to run a Maker Rewards program to do a similar thing, to encourage learning on the platform, especially leading up into this technological breakthrough of 4844, where this game of market making on-chain gets even cheaper and easier. Finally, we think that traditional finance is going to continue to onboard to the chain. This open ecosystem has too many benefits and removes too much value extraction for it to not be the natural progression. And while we think there's going to be many exchanges going forward, there's only going to be one order book protocol. And that's why if Ethereum is a world computer, we believe Rubicon is a world order book. We're committed to this cause in the long run. We think that we need a viable exchange protocol through which you can facilitate price discovery on chain. That's only going to happen because of the underlying infrastructure pushing forward to enable these protocols to increasingly happen in composability with all other networks. So if you're looking to get involved, there's a variety of ways. From the graph side, we'll soon be migrating our subgraphs to the decentralized network, where you can participate as a curator or an indexer or just a consumer of its data. We're really excited to see what happens and cannot wait to continue to be a part of this beautiful ecosystem network. From Arbitrum, we'll soon be publicly announcing our launch. Check it out. If you haven't been to Arbitrum yet, bridge on over. It's a great place with a thriving ecosystem that we believe is going to help lead DeFi adoption globally. From the developer's perspective, cannot stress it enough, there are so many ways for you to get involved. We actively run a grants committee where we're looking to help fund developers looking to build on the protocol. From being a market maker to an arbitrageur, to a liquidator, to an interface developer, really the sky's the limit, and we're here to help you at every step of the way, whatever it may be. From a liquidity provider perspective, again, we'll be launching the V2 money markets soon that are going to enable spot margin trading in the system. You can earn passive yield while doing so, and it's a great way to be a part of the ecosystem. Finally, when it comes to people, join our Discord, read our docs, check out our Twitter. We're here to welcome you into our community and couldn't be more excited for you to be a part of it. Quick thank you, the Rubicon core team. It's the best team I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I'm so excited and grateful that I get to go day in, day out and work with the people who are committed to a similar cause as I am. And finally, our community. We're only here because of the people who are using these protocols. We're only going to be here tomorrow because of them, and we'd be remiss to ignore them. They're really what pushed the space forward, and turning over ownership to them is the end goal and the end game. Here's a quick link. Check it out. It has resources from our SDKs to our open source bots, analytics, docs, grant committee, etc. It's a great way to get more resources on the protocol, and reach out if you have any questions. We're more than happy to help you on board and can't wait for you to be a part of the World Order Book. With that, we'd love to answer any questions. Thank y'all for your time.
I have two questions. One is, what kind of users are you seeing in the space? Do you have that data? And then two, from the roles you mentioned about people getting involved, where do you think there's a gap? Where are you lacking, and what's kind of most important? So I guess on the supply and demand side, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say for, since our inception, we've seen a lot of retail use, and it's resulted in what we kind of call the community spread. It's the average trader coming in, placing both a buy and sell offer on both sides. It may not be the most competitive. They're click trading. They're not updating it often, but they're taking advantage of the order book to express their intent. So again, it's a lot of small traders, and it's a lot of small, manual market makers who are coming back time and time again. In terms of where we're looking to really expand, these networks are based on automated traders at the end of the day. When you look at the New York Stock Exchange, it's Citadel and name your favorite big player. They're only going to be competitive because of these automated traders. So we've been really happy to start onboarding some of these players today, and we're looking to onboard more, whether it's the traditional big shop or the small individual hobbyist who just wants to run a bot. We have an open source bot example, which anyone can come in and run. We have a Python SDK that also has some bot examples, and we're really looking to invest in that side of the network and have a whole grants committee just for doing that.
Nice, thank you. Any questions? Here you
go. Can you explain a little bit more like the difference between, currently the only thing that I've heard about is AMMs, and then so my understanding was they had order books, but they couldn't support it, and there's AMMs, and now you're going back to the order book. What will what will change as a result of now there's an order book option, like for the traders? Is it affecting spread prices? Like what's the impact of now going back and introducing order book as an option in a DEX when everybody else kind of was on an AMM? I don't really understand, I guess, the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess in the short term, to answer spread, AMMs by design have to capture their spread through a form of a fee. And so there's an arbitrary limit in which they can get with their spread in and of itself that's bound by that fee. Taking a step further, when it comes to liquidity providers in that system, AMMs only update their price when someone trades against it. And so typically what you see in practice happen is that sophisticated actors have some centralized Canadian exchange connection. They see a big price move. That AMM price lags behind that big move, and you're able to buy and then sell in that centralized exchange. And so really what we see order books doing in the long run, especially as these layer twos continue to scale and the cost of transactions and the speed of them increase, is that you'll have less of that lag behind a centralized exchange, meaning you have a more true price on a chain that you can depend upon. And that has a variety of impacts, from removing the need to have like an on-chain oracle to connect to Binance to put that price on chain, to having spreads that in theory get down to the GUI. It's really just bringing the efficiency of high frequency trading on chain, and it's possible today because of the advanced scaling of these layer 2 networks.
Yeah. Here you go.
Does that mean that this concept, which again always feels fuzzy to me, of impermanent loss, like decreases or even goes away with order books, or is that concept still like in play with the order books?
No, yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I would say, maybe not impermanent loss as a term is a good way to put it. You can still lose money on a strategy if you're executing a poor trade and then price moves against you. But you're not now requiring liquidity providers to post a bad price and eat the consequence of doing so. And so your permanent loss more comes down to the ability to properly execute strategies, and it's more on a per actor basis at that point. I hope that makes sense. If not, happy to expand more.
Well, one more thing from me is I understand the benefits, the scalability and the less authoritarian pricing and all that stuff. And when you're thinking of like what to build to get to like the traditional experience, what are the cons right now of building it in this way? And that was essentially just targets for you to overcome. Like, yeah, I understand the pros. What are the cons of building it in a decentralized way?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the first one that pops to mind is you're still limited by block space. And so, these matching engines are limited by their ability to do compute within the constraints of the EVM. And you don't have that constraint on centralized exchange. You can, run your for loop for as long as you want. And so that's the immediate one where I'd say we're going to be investing our most time going forward, and also where we're depending upon the most from L2 scaling. Past that, I mean, a lot of these networks, say Bedrock has a 2-second block time. And so you're still having that lag compared to a centralized exchange where you don't have, let's say latency bandwidth of which is there today. And again, it's really a longer term bet on the advancement of these networks to increase throughput, decrease latency accordingly. And if you want to get really granular when it comes to latency, a centralized exchange is, you can be geolocated right next to it. A decentralized network has no centralized point of which you can geolocate against. And so the ability to compete on latency in that aspect is a lot trickier. And then, I don't know, maybe gossip networks get really cute and things like that. But I think that's a problem for later and not for now.
You think of like the Flash Boys book and IEX and all that stuff, and how they were just racing based on geographical proximity to the source. Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to take another 10-minute break. We'll go to Banksa, the fiat on-ramp provider that the Graph Network integrated, and talk about what it looks like right now, what it could look like in the future, and then we'll end with the layer 2 transfer tools discussion. See everyone in 10 minutes.
It was like up there with like one of the biggest projects there.
All right, we're starting the next one. This one is Matt from Banksa, who you lead U.S. partnerships, correct? Yeah. So probably talk a little bit about how integrated with the graph, but what's important is the credit card, bank account, and just Web 2 style SaaS experience, which is so important for getting everyone to have a seamless experience in Web 3 infrastructure in general. And it'd be great, and we'll probably ask some questions about who you're working with now, and then how this is kind of protocol and a little different shift, and then what that's looking like. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Potter. I am the U.S. business development lead for Banksa, and we are one of the premier fiat-to-crypto on and off ramps, as Kyle had mentioned. And today I'll be talking a little bit more about how fiat-to-crypto on and off ramps can help bring in more enterprise businesses and more users into the crypto space. So I've really got kind of two parts of the presentation today. I'll talk for the first half about Banksa, I'll give you a high-level overview of who we are. And then for the second portion, I'll talk about OpenRamp, which is our solution that we offer, that we work with the Graph on, that allows users to interact with smart contracts directly with fiat currency. So credit cards or debit cards that can interact directly with smart contracts. So first half will be a little bit more about Banksa, and then we'll go into the OpenRamp solution. But Banksa's mission is really to bring as many people into the crypto space as possible. So we're talking about merchants, we're talking about end users. We want to make it as seamless as possible to get into crypto and get into Web3. Our company started in 2014, so we've been in the space for a long time. We started as a crypto first company, so we were not a fintech company that got into crypto. We were a crypto first company. Our founders were actually based in Melbourne, Australia. They started as a Bitcoin mining company, realized how hard it was to get users into securing digital assets, being able to use fiat currency to buy digital assets. And so they shifted kind of the focus into fiat to crypto on and off ramps. And here we are roughly 10 years later, still providing that same service. So we've been around for a very long time. We've got obviously great partnerships with the Graph, with Arbitrum. I mean, you name it, we're working with kind of the who's who in Web3, whether it's decentralized exchanges, wallets, gaming apps. We're providing services across the board. And so the company is still headquartered in Melbourne, Australia, but we've also got offices in Sydney. We've got offices in the Netherlands. Here in the US, our main office is in Reno, Nevada. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, so took the early flight out here, so still working on some fumes. But yeah, we've got about 200 members now at a global level. And again, we're providing the easiest way for users to get active in the crypto and Web3 space. And the value that we're providing for our partners and for builders is really our payment network. So we currently offer support in 140 plus different countries where users all across the world can access digital assets through Visa, through MasterCard, through Apple Pay or Google Pay. So we've got that available across the globe. The additional value that we offer, though, is providing local payment networks. So for users to be able to use their local payment method, particularly in countries where there's not a lot of credit card penetration, or there's some barriers to entry to actually use a credit card to purchase crypto, we offer what we call alternate payment methods or local payment methods in a variety of different countries. So we've got great coverage in Europe, in the UK, obviously support in North America. We continue to expand into Latin America and Southeast Asia. That's a real focus for us for the end of this year. And then we'll eventually, Q4 of this year and then Q1 of next year, move on to Africa. So we're going to try and get as many local payment methods as possible so that your users have access to be able to enter into the space. And in terms of our product set, we're really known for our on and off ramps. That's kind of what we've been known for in the industry for the past 10 years. But we provide a couple other different solutions as well. One of those is an NFT checkout solution where users can purchase NFTs using a credit card or a debit card. It's kind of similar to the OpenRamp model that I'm going to talk about here, where we abstract away the complexities of purchasing an NFT, having to buy a specific digital asset and then interact with a marketplace. We can actually do that on behalf of the end user just by entering their credit card information. And then we also do, they should say token listings, but paid integrations. It's where if you have a native asset that you're looking to get out there and allow users to be able to purchase it in a more seamless manner, we can provide those services as well. We've got a lot of great relationships across the board that can help with that. We don't do that so much in the US anymore because with everything going on, I'm sure you guys are all aware of that, but on a global level, we can still provide those services too. So we'll move on to the next. And this is just kind of an example of the user journey. So it's a very seamless kind of workflow. We want to make it, again, almost like Web 2 centric for users, that they feel like they're interacting almost with an e-commerce site when they're purchasing digital assets. So it's very straightforward, very simple. Banksa handles literally everything from accepting payments to KYC to fulfillment. We do it all. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for our partners that utilize the service. And I think I'm on a little bit of a lag. There we go. And so from the integration side, it's, again, we make it very seamless for users to be able to purchase crypto, But for our partners and our builders as well, we want to make it very simple for them to plug in the Banksa ecosystem. And so what that looks like is we've really got two separate options. We've got the full API integration. There we go. API integration options that can get as detailed as you want, passing information back and forth. Or we've got very simple referral method integrations as well. So for our partners that just want to allow their users to be able to purchase a specific asset, they don't want to have to go through a huge integration haul, take weeks or months or whatever it is. We can set up a very simple referral method that provides all the same resources that an API integration would, but it's a lot less dev heavy. So, and then from a user experience, and this will be my last slide on the Banksa stuff, and then we can get into the OpenRamp stuff. There's really three different options from a user experience. So there's a custom checkout option where you guys build out the complete front end, and basically you're just plugging in Banksa's Rails on the back end to be able to accept payments and provide digital assets or NFTs or subscriptions or whatever it is that the application provides. That's typically reserved for our largest partners. The embedded checkout or the iframe widget is probably the solution that most people are familiar with. It's a pop-up within an application that allows the user to do the same thing, purchase an asset, go through KYC if necessary, receive their currency. And then the final one is just that button redirect. If you wanted a very simple just buy button, you have that option. So that's it from the Banksa side. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the OpenRamp side, and I'm going to pull out some notes on this. I know this is typically a product team conversation, and so I want to make sure I don't miss anything on this. But the OpenRamp solution is something that we built in response to requests from our partners. So our partners like The Graph and other groups that are looking for a way to pull in as many individuals, as many enterprise businesses into the ecosystem. And so with that in mind, we created something called OpenRamp that really abstracts away all the complexities of transactions that happen in Web3. And so we wanted to make it as simple as possible for users to use a credit card to pay for a subscription, to set up reoccurring payments, to buy NFTs. I talked about that a little bit. And so that's the solution that we've built out with the Graph, where users can go in and actually top up their wallets, interact with the billing contract from the Graph directly just by inputting their credit card information. And I wish that I would have set a demo up in this so you guys could see it. It makes a lot more sense if I could show it to you. I'll try and illustrate it as best I can, but if you want to talk to me after the conversation, you want to see an example, I can show you on my phone, or I'll get your information and send it over to you. But it's a pretty cool tool. So the real goal, our thesis is that real innovation can only be achieved when merchants and individuals get the same kind of experience that they expect from Web 2 in Web 3. So that's kind of our goal on what we're trying to achieve here. And we know that crypto presents kind of a new form of economics and a new model that is more fair and inclusive than the old form. And so we want to pull all these enterprise companies and all these users into our ecosystem. We want them to plug into our ecosystem and start using what we're doing. And so you guys are the ones that are building the most important part of it. You're building on the three pillars of crypto that we all kind of know and believe in: the decentralization aspect, the permissionless aspect, where anybody, regardless of geography or status or opportunity, can come in and have access to these financial tools that are so important for everybody. And then the composability side, like what we're doing here, we want to make it very simple for you guys to be able to build on top of it, not necessarily to need even permission to be able to do it, but just to be able to go in, grab what we offer in terms of the fiat and the licensing and that types of stuff, and be able to plug that directly in to your solution. So we're excited about that. We think we can unlock a number of things, but we also know that we face a lot of different challenges with the crypto infrastructure. And that's kind of what we're trying to address here. So here's kind of what the value chain looks like today. We're trying to get mainstream users over to our distributed services, but there's a lot of disparate systems kind of at play here. UI, UX can be a problem. Even many like crypto regulars still struggle sometimes with the solution set and trying to figure out exactly how to get through a transaction. We know there's value. We know there's multiple application layers that can support what we're trying to accomplish. And what Banksa's goal has really been is to marry the fiat layers with the contracting layers And that's what this open ramp solution looks like. So what does that mean? It means that we can unlock through the new open ramp solution, Banksa can provide a way to bring traditional payments experience into Web3. So the user only needs to interact with their fiat method of choice to be able to interact with a smart contract. There's no complexity. There's no needing to understand how to purchase a token from a DEX that can sometimes be confusing, how to interact with a wallet, how to approve a transaction. It's all abstracted away and it's all completed on the user's behalf. So this is kind of the model that we are in today, where the agent would be the user. They're depositing funds, they're buying the native token, they're navigating through a specific dApp, they're trying to execute a transaction. Sometimes it may be very simple to understand, sometimes it can be pretty complicated. We think that there are some limiting factors to this. And because wallets can disintermediate the dApps, because sometimes they can be not as seamless as possible, we believe that that actually pulls enterprise businesses and many users away from the Web3 ecosystem. We think that we could bring more enterprise businesses into crypto infrastructure if we made it more seamless. And so the other issues is that a lot of the large organizations that we are talking to want a way to make things automatic, don't want to have to sign a bunch of different transactions, don't want to have a single employee that's doing that. And so we're trying to expand the scope of what's possible with this new open ramp model. And so this is the open ramp model the workflow looks a little bit like this, if it goes through. It'll get there, I think. We good? There it is. So yeah, so in this scenario, basically, Banksa is abstracting away a lot of the issues that are the confusing aspects of what happens when you're going through a transaction. So this is exactly how we've kind of set things up with the graph. We can abstract away all the complexities of multi-step transactions and allow users to make a purchase, to sign up for a subscription, to set up reoccurring payments, all in a single transaction. And so the only thing that the original user really needs to know is how to pull out their credit or debit card and input that information. So we can do the rest on their behalf. And this is kind of the current state of what Open Ramp looks like right now. I'll talk a little bit about the future state and how it's even more exciting. But we think that this does a number of things, that it's going to open up bigger markets for Web3 in general. And there we go. Oh, the only one having problems with this. Okay, so yeah, we do think that it will open up a lot bigger opportunities across the space. So now we can tie fiat funds directly into contract logic, something that couldn't be done before, something that we think is very, very exciting. We're separating the storage and signing duties, so it creates a new model. There are certain use cases that we believe in right now, and I'll talk about a few of those here at the very end of this. But I'm sure there's a lot of use cases that we haven't even considered that builders like you guys may be considered, may be able to figure out different use cases for this that could also be exciting. So we're pretty pumped about that as well. And so how it works, like the getting set up, it's pretty straightforward. You basically need to open a Banksa account. You pick from the available networks and the native tokens that you're looking to provide. You provide the contract details in a few different sections there. You send us over the audit report, and then Banksa reviews and publishes the connection for you. So this is kind of where the future state lies, where instead of Banksa submitting transactions, on the end user's behalf, we're going to open this up so that you guys can just connect directly to it. And so the future state is where instead of Banksa providing the custom logic to interact with your smart contracts, you as the dApp creator can simply input the required code as part of this product and allow direct access to fiat interaction. So we're super excited about that. We're super excited about the possibilities of what that could entail. And you're just taking this a step further for the use cases right now. We're already finding ways for our partners to set up recurring payments to support long-term business growth. We're doing variable payments. So if for instance, a user wanted to DCA dynamic investments into a specific application, they could do that. It didn't have to be set at any given specific time. I already talked a little bit about this, but like NFT checkout, where users don't necessarily have to understand everything about the NFT marketplace. They just have to have their credit card or debit card and they can make a purchase that way. We've had a lot of interest from game developers as well that, want players to be able to come in, just play the game. They don't want to have to worry about buying the native token and figuring out where to put it and do all these different things. They just want a user to be able to unlock what they're trying to unlock and do that simply with a credit card or a debit card. So we've got a lot of interest there as well. And then kind of the final use case is a lot of DeFi applications have also asked about this, where like liquid staking, for instance, if somebody's going to be rewarded for staking a certain asset or providing liquidity or whatever it is, instead of having to go through that sometimes complicated process of buying the specific currency, staking it, receiving the synthetic asset, we can just do that on their behalf. All the user has to do is buy that initial digital currency. We'll do everything else on the back end. They'll receive the synthetic asset and it's good to go. So we think that, again, the opportunities are really endless. We're trying to build unique features that can support the growth of the ecosystem, that really can allow enterprise businesses, more users to come into the space and have a seamless experience, an experience that they would pick up from an e-commerce company, or they're setting up their utilities and just putting a credit card in and just having things work for the next year. That's kind of the end goal and where we're going. We are so excited to have a partnership like the Graph that's doing some really unique things, and where we can provide this service for them and then kind of build and tweak and do the different things that need to come from there. So that's it. I wish that I had something to show you guys in terms of it in actual use, but I do have that on my phone. So if you want to connect later, I can send you an email, or we can connect after the show.
All right, let's give him a round of applause. And it has been great working with you all and understanding how flexible you were, and just the amount of currencies and things you were able to do is really important. One thing I have a question on is, and it's probably not for you, it's more like your legal team or something, but obviously things are restricted right now in this space, and as this lead, what do you think would need to happen for this space in this region to get comfortable doing this? Is it just clarity, or is it something else?
That's a great question, Kyle. It is clarity, and this is definitely a better question for legal than for me. But it is clarity in that there's too many unknowns right now, and we're hesitant as a company with, being publicly traded. We're publicly traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, having these licenses, all these different things. We're hesitant to make the wrong move and get in trouble and kind of lose some of the momentum that we've gained over the last 10 years. So that's probably the biggest piece. We are, like I mentioned from the very beginning, we're a crypto first company. We're not a fintech company. So we want to do these things. It's just, we've got to be careful at the same time. So it's kind of that dance. Hopefully if we do receive some clarity, over the next few months, there'll be a lot more options available to us here in the US.
Hey, so I'm curious to know, would you say then that the regulatory legal side of things is harder than the technology development of your products? I mean, is that the limiting factor when thinking about expanding to new countries that have different local providers, means of payment?
Yeah, that's also that's a really good question. I do think it's more the regulatory environment than the technology. So for a lot of the on-ramps, we've built, the technology to be able to accept fiat currencies. The difficult part is getting the right licenses in each of these different jurisdictions. That's really the hard part, because every, specific country has different licenses, different things that you have to do. That's the really hard part. And part of our strategy as well is that we go to each of these countries, we spin up an entity, we create banking relationships, we do all of that work. We're not, I guess we quote unquote do it by the book. So that part takes more resources, it takes more time, and that's really the hard part. We know that there's a gap in some of the countries where we want to provide support. It's just kind of a time thing. The technology's there, it's just the regulation is still a little cloudy.
When you think of the game aspect that you mentioned and people not wanting to do that, it makes a lot of sense. Is that always on the supply side, or meaning the actual app or company doing it, or is there something that you can do for individuals that where they can plug and play and go wherever they need to? How does that integration look?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of evolving. It's interesting because the product team, they're having conversations every month. They're kind of like, where's the puck going? What kind of things do we need to do? And so that is something that we're always considering. I don't know if it's a supply constraint specifically, or if there's, it's just the build out and the resources of the integration. We can only pick and choose so many things to do, right? So I think that's probably more the limiting factor than anything else. We can do a variety of things, but it's kind of like narrowing the focus, not trying to be everything to everybody. Just we've got to find out what the right solution is and be able to build that out and make it seamless. So
sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Appreciate it.
Oh, one more.
Hi, sorry. When it comes to onboarding new users, do you also think about account abstraction?
So we do. There's some things that we can't abstract away, unfortunately, like the KYC, for instance. So, there's a number of things like we try and make it as seamless as possible when onboarding new users. So we actually have released something called KYC free tier. So if there's a user that's making a deposit that's less than $500 USD, we don't have to do full KYC on that user. They're still going to have to input some information, but we're not going to ask for the selfie, the identification. So that's a small piece of it. We're trying to get even better than that, where there are always going to be certain things that we have to do. But the KYC, and we can see this from like transactions that start to transactions that finish, the KYC part is the one where most people drop off. So we're constantly trying to improve that as well. And there's, the KYC free tier is the first part of that. There's more stuff that we're working on, but again, it all comes down to regulation. We got to play by the rules in a lot of ways. So good question. It still can be a little tough for users to onboard, but we're trying. We're getting there.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Pablo here? Oh, there he is. All right. Layer 2 transfer tools time. First ever public demo, and I'm excited for it. We'll take a minute to set up.
Thank you.
Should I just go? All right. Hi, everybody. Okay. I hope you still have some energy left before the drinks and food. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to present the graphs L2 journey, what we've done so far. I'm going to show you a preview of the transfer tools that will allow people to move to L2 easily, and talk a little bit about the next steps to get these to mainnet and then what's coming after that. So I'm Pablo. Some of you saw me earlier today. I started in Edge and Node last year as part of the smart contracts team, and almost immediately started working on this. And now more of a protocol product manager role, and like a lot of coordination work for all of the amazing people that are making this happen now. And the challenge that we had and what triggered all of this work that I'm going to show you is we're moving a running protocol to L2 to Arbitrum, and trying to do it without interruptions and in a very safe way. It's in a way like asking a lot of people on an airplane to switch to another airplane in midair. But also we need everyone to decide to do the switch by themselves. So it's quite a tricky thing. We have all of the state that lives in smart contracts on mainnets. Indexers have stake. There's delegators, there's curators. Subgraphs are deployed there, and it's not something that you can just copy and move to L2. And in all of these actions, all of these states that you have in smart contracts, they also involve things like thawing periods or taxes, and there is a cost and a time in wanting to take out that state and put it somewhere else. And we wanted to make it very easy to do that and avoid all of these waits and all of these additional costs. So this happened in several stages. It started early last year, maybe even before that. I know I joined early last year. And we thought of doing it in 3 stages so that we could take the care to do it in a way that was safe for everybody and in the right way, hopefully. So all of 2022 was basically preparation for this. And then we rolled out the 3 stages in quick succession since the beginning of this year. And we're now standing on stage 3. I'm going to explain now what this means and what's left. So we started looking at the L2 options in February. There were some conversations before, but around that time, there was consensus among the core dev teams that were that got together to discuss this, that Arbitrum was the best choice with the information we had at the point, the stage of development of the other L2s. So what happened is we prepared a graph improvement proposal, and we let the community discuss in terms of like, is this something that we all want to do? And it seemed like it was something that everyone wanted to do. So we started moving forward, and we prepared the contracts for the 2 subsequent stages. So we built a bridge so that people can move GRT and also some state from L1 to L2. And we did the changes that we needed in a protocol so that we could deploy it to L2. Not a lot. EVM compatibility is useful. And we also did the contracts for stage 2. That is, we wanted to be able to mint indexing rewards on Arbitrum. And these are newly issued GRT, so it's not quite straightforward how you would do that in 2 networks at the same time. So we actually had to iterate a little bit on this. But we got those contracts done, and then late last year, around December, we actually deployed the bridge, and we deployed the L2 protocol. And then beginning of this year, we entered stage 1, where the bridge and the protocol were deployed on L2. We have now mainnet, the graph network, and then Arbitrum 1, the graph network. And then all of the other work started in terms of surfacing this in the products in Explorer and Studio and the things that people used to interact with this network, or now these networks. So once that happened, and we went through all of the testing that was needed for the contracts to mint the rewards in L2. And this was, re-architecting all of the indexing rewards distribution and changing it. And I mentioned there was some iteration. We developed 2 different approaches for this and ended up doing a linear formula. So indexing rewards should used to follow a compound interest formula, and now it's linear. So this allowed us to do the minting on both sides and being able to keep the count of how many tokens could be minted in L2. And then we upgraded the bridge so that we could support these L2 native tokens, so to speak, during the bridging. If you're familiar with how bridging tokens across layer 1 and layer 2 works, usually you put some tokens in escrow in L1, and that mints new tokens in L2. But then if you're going back and there are tokens that aren't in that escrow, well, you need to mint them. So we had to do a change in the bridge to support that. And we had to do it in a way that was careful, because we put a cap on how many tokens can be minted so that it's exactly the maximum amount that you could have minted on L2. And once we were done with this, and we already had the protocol deployed, we already had the products, Explorer and Studio supporting this, and that's when we went through the council. I mean, we went through for the initial deployment too, but through the council to approve starting that initial 5% of indexing rewards being minted on Arbitrum. And this is what brought us to where we are now, that is stage 3. That is, we have 22 indexers that are already doing their operations on Arbitrum as well as mainnets, and 173 subgraphs that have been published there. And all of this is obviously with a very small amount of the indexing rewards, but we want to get that to 100% at some point. So in order to unlock this, we need to make it very easy for the whole network, the whole community to move over to L2. And that's where the transfer tools come in, and that's what I'm going to show you next. So as I said, main point, we want to move this state. We want to move the GRT to L2 without delays, without downtime, and without additional costs beyond, obviously, the gas cost. That is unavoidable. So we did this for 4 kinds of transfers: subgraphs, curation, indexer, stake, and delegation. And these are the 4 kinds of state that you need to be able to move to L2 so that everyone can be on the other side. For subgraphs, this has several steps, but the main idea is we're sending the subgraph, all of the information about that subgraph, together with the subgraph owner's curation, with one message that goes from L1 to L2. So the subgraph owner performs a single transaction. This sends the message through the bridge, and the subgraph appears on the other side. And then, okay, during that time, there's some time when that subgraph is in flight. What happens with the subgraph during that time? The subgraph in L1 is going to be deprecated because it's no longer in L1. Now it's an L2 subgraph. And we have to support subgraph consumers that are still going to be wanting to query that subgraph during that time. So what we did, or we're doing, is adding indexer tooling so that indexers can easily support indexing on both networks with a single stack, and give them tooling so that they can keep supporting the subgraph that is being migrated, and then very quickly start indexing on the other side, because they actually already have it in their database. So if they're using the same stack, then there's no need to re-index the subgraph again. And another improvement is on the gateway. You're going to query the L1 gateway trying to get that subgraph, but there's now something in that gateway that will forward the queries to the L2 gateway and the L2 indexers if there are no indexers left on L1. So all of this is a lot of moving pieces so that when subgraph developers and subgraph owners want to move their subgraphs to L2, they can do it in the most seamless way. So actually, let me show you how this actually works. And I hope this is not too small. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit. All right. So sneak preview, this is staging environment, testnet, but pretty close to what I hope we're going to deploy very, very soon. I have this subgraph aptly named, not very useful, but I want to send it to L2. And I just have a button here in Studio that says I want to transfer it to Arbitrum Girly in this case because it's a testnet subgraph. And this is the actual transfer tool. It's granted a lot of steps, but what we wanted to focus on was making this experience very safe. It's very tricky to send interlayer messages, and we want to make sure that everyone knows exactly what to do and can take the steps carefully to get the subgraph on the other side. So the first step is going to be sending that L1 to L2 message. And I have to be the owner, obviously, for this. And I might actually be using a multisig as the account that owns my subgraph. And therefore, that multisig probably doesn't exist in Arbitrum. So I might want to put a different owner for the subgraph on L2. And you'll see this pattern in all of the transfer tools. We're accounting for that possibility and making it very easy to set up. Okay, this is going to be the L2 wallet that I'm going to use. And if you're using a multisig, you have to choose a different address. We don't want to risk people losing their stuff because they're sending it to a non-existent address. So, okay, I understand the steps. I would say, if you're doing this process, make sure you already have some ETH bridged to Arbitrum. If not, you're going to be prompted to do so at some point, but it's easier if you already have it there. And then the actual transfer is as simple as signing this transaction. You'll see you need to send a little bit of ETH here. If you're, again, familiar with the Arbitrum bridge, we're paying for the L2 gas from L1 and sending the message with the subgraph. And as you can see, I'm sending the 99 GRT that I had signaled on this subgraph, and it's going to go through. And okay, I guess the demo gods are not with me today. Thanks. Okay. If you do a leap of faith and believe me that what you would see here is a timer saying, okay, now you have 20 minutes, go get a coffee or something. I'm not going to ask you to wait for me for 20 minutes. And actually, this little cross tells me there's something we need to fix. Luckily, this is not on mainnet and production yet. But 20 minutes later, you would see this. Your subgraph made it all the way to L2. It's a retriable ticket. It might happen that that L2 gas that we paid for wasn't enough in L1. And then you might need to then go ahead and retry the transaction on L2. And this step is here so that we ensure you're ready to do that if it's needed, because it's very important. So I'm now gonna switch my wallet to Arbitrum, connect with my L1 wallet, my L2 wallet, sorry. And I have, this incomplete transfer. So now I'm at this step. The subgraph is almost there, but not quite. I will confirm it and finally publish it. Until I do this, the subgraph is in a sort of limbo. Luckily, the L1 indexer should still be serving that subgraph. And now with this final transaction, I'm going to take that subgraph, publish it to L2, and we have an L2 subgraph. I don't know if it's my network or, okay. Which one do I confirm? And then hopefully, in this case, the subgraph transferred successfully. Thank you. Cool. So yeah, from this point onwards, if you go to the Explorer, actually in Studio, you look at my the subgraphs, and this subgraph is actually now on Girly and Arbitrum Girly. The one on Gurley is deprecated, but this one is also here. And because this is a useless subgraph, it's not syncing, so don't look at that. But yeah, subgraph transfer to L2, we're good to go. And oh, okay. There we go. So we're back to the transfer tools and moving on to the other participants. Stake transfers, this is very important for indexers. They want to set up their L1 and L2 operations. And this is, as I mentioned, we're providing new tooling so that they can do it with a single stack. No need to have separate databases and two completely different sets of infrastructure. And because this might be the case, because you might be running in L1 and L2 for a while, and while indexing rewards are going to be transferring from one network to the other, it makes sense to do so, then transfers of stake allow you to send partial amounts of stake. Obviously, you need to send over the minimum stake amount. And there are a few other restrictions, like if you have open allocations on L1, that means you're still indexing a lot of subgraphs on L1 and you have stake locked into that those subgraphs in a way. You have to free that up before you can send it over. So most cases, if you want to fully transfer, you'll just close all of your L1 allocations and then do the transfer. If you want to send just a little bit, you close a little bit so that you still have enough to cover your needed stake in L1 and then send the rest over. And for this, I have another demo. I'm going to need to connect with the right wallet here. Okay, so this is my indexer account. Again, on a development testnet environment for now, coming to mainnet soon. And I'm looking at my profile on Explorer, and I can see that, okay, some rewards are already happening on Arbitrum, and I might want to transfer stake. So I'm going to open the transfer tool. And at this point, I think I do have a connectivity problem. No, okay. And I should be on Ethereum Gurley and not on Arbitrum Gurley because I just switched. I know I would recommend the graph, but. Okay, so now stake transfer tool, a few less steps. Subgraphs are, I would say, the one that need more steps because they need this second transaction to publish in L2. But for all of the other participants, it's actually going to look a lot like this. So for delegators and for curators, it's also going to be this 3-step thing where you just need to send a transaction from L1 to L2. And I won't say you can forget about it because you send the transaction from L1 to L2, and then as in every Arbitrum bridge transaction, you might have to retry it on the L2 side in case there was an L2 gas spike. So in this case, yeah, I have my wallet. I can set a receiving Arbitrum address, and I put the amount of stake that I want to transfer. I'll just send all of it, sign the transaction. We initiate the stake transfer. You can look at the transaction on Etherscan as usual. And then in this case, you should just, again, see the timer. And okay, stake transfer initiated. We have a timer. And it's about 20 minutes for this to go, at some point, the Arbitrum sequencer picks up this transaction, posts it to L2, and then we go to step 3, which in this case, and for the other transfer tools, in most cases, it'll just be automatic. You don't need to run it manually. If you do need to run it because there was a gas spike, you just switch to your Arbitrum wallet and just execute the transaction. And that's where having some ETH bridge on Arbitrum might come handy. And if not, you can get it at that point and do it. You have 7 days to do that. And a very important thing I will say is if you run into any issues throughout this process, we're going to have several support channels, an email address on Discord. You can find us. We'll help you. We won't let you with your stake or your subgraphs in limbo between the 2 layers. So yeah, don't worry about that. So that's the transfer tools. That's the ones that I'm going to demo now. For the other 2, delegation and curation, it's actually very similar. You can transfer the delegation after your indexer has sent some stake to L2. So as long as your indexer has more than the minimum stake on L2 or has done this transfer at least once, then as a delegator, you can choose when you want to send your stake there, your delegated stake there. And If you're not happy with this, if for whatever reason you want to stay in L2, in L1, then once your indexer has fully transferred all of their stake to L2, then you can just withdraw in L1 without the thawing period. And in the case of curators, it's also, again, depending on when the subgraph has been transferred to L2, then you can start sending your signal to L2 as well. Now, signal on L2 uses the flat bonding curve. We've mentioned this a few times, and this means there's less risk when you're curating. But for this, your curation signal is converted to GRT when the subgraph is migrated, and then that amount of GRT will be used to mint new signal in L2. And in this case, you can also just withdraw in L1 if you don't want to go through the bridging process. So that's transfer tools. It should be only those 4 cases. There are a few other cases, and this might be important for a lot of community participants that have some specific vesting contracts, and they stake and delegate from those. And don't worry, there will be ways to also do that. It will look very similar to this, just a few more steps before, so that you can ensure that you're doing it with a vesting contract on both sides. And then, so this is what we have so far. The products are getting there. We still have to do a little bit more of development and testing to get all of this supported, and to make sure that this new indexer stack works properly, and that all of the indexers are ready and prepared to support this migration and support the transfers, and make sure that the subgraphs have this seamless experience. So in the next few weeks, I'm not going to say how many, but in the next few weeks, we're going to get this to mainnet and deployed and on production, and you'll be able to go to thegraph.com/explorer or studio and transfer your stake, subgraphs, and so on. Once that happens, that's not the end of it. Obviously, we need to get to the point where 100% of rewards are on Arbitrum. So we've put forward a proposal, another graph improvement proposal. This one is GAP52 if you want to go into the forums and look at it. And the idea is we need certain milestones to happen before the community is happy and saying, okay, we're going to increase rewards on L2. We're more comfortable with how the network on L2 is working, and the quality of service of the indexing, and the amount of subgraphs and so on. So to move to 25% of rewards on L2, we'll need at least 2 weeks from when we launch the transfer tools, so that we make sure that everyone can try them. We can confirm that indexers can use it, that indexers can set up their L2 operations, and that some subgraphs can move over. And from then on, there's a next step that is moving to 50%. That doesn't have a lot more conditions. It's just 2 more weeks, or at least 2 more weeks with everything working well. And then a bit of a longer process that's going to be at least 2 months, in which we need certain amount of indexers, certain amount of delegators, and certain amount of subgraphs to have moved to L2 before we do a big bump and say, okay, now 95% of rewards are going to be minted on Arbitrum. And after that, I mean, long before this, I think maybe when it's 25% L2, I would think that Arbitrum will be the preferred place to interact with the graph network. Because beyond the rewards moving up, we're already going to have a lot of activity there, a lot of indexers serving your subgraphs, and there should be no reason to deploy any new thing to mainnet just to pay more gas costs. But once we get to that 95% mark, the GIP says at least 1 month, but I think that the main thing there is we need at least, or the majority of the subgraphs that are actually sending queries on mainnet to have been transferred to L2, because the moment we do the 100% switch to L2, then there's no indexer rewards left on L1, and then most or all indexers would just go away from L1 and just do full operations on L2. So to do that last 5%, it might take a bit longer than a month. It depends on how fast the subgraph developers and consumers decide to do that transfer. But hopefully it will happen within a relatively short time frame. And then at some point, the council, the community might decide to sort of deprecate or disable the L1 network. For now, there's no concrete plan of doing that, but it shouldn't be necessary, because with no indexing rewards, everyone will be on L2 and taking advantage of the reduced gas costs. So I want to close with some notes of what else is coming. So we did all of this extended teamwork to get the network on L2, but it's not the end of it, of course. And there are a lot of other improvements, and a lot of core devs are working on, well, all the core devs are working on a lot of improvements to the network. So after this, or while this is happening, we also have the improved billing and payments experience. BK mentioned this earlier, the subscriptions that hopefully make it easier for everyone to pay for their queries. Improved protocol mechanisms. There are a lot of things. We have a brilliant economic research team looking at improving the mechanisms, making them more efficient, easier to understand, easier to interact with, and more beneficial for all the participants. For instance, there's a change in how indexers get their query fees paid after indexing a subgraph. That's coming really soon, called exponential rebates. Better subgraph upgrades experience. Like, we know it can be tricky to upgrade a subgraph that is deployed to the network. There's contracts there's things you're doing, signal that needs to move. We're working on improving that. And substreams powered subgraphs that are happening, they're being deployed now, I think. And I can't wait to see what happens with those on the network. And obviously a lot more change being supported. And more, and like, I could be here all day. I know Sam's work with, Sam's semiotics team work with AI and different applications of AI in the graph, and very exciting stuff. So yeah, I think, well, that's what I have. Ready for drinks and food, I think. So thank you.
And that's all she wrote, folks. Bar is down the way. Let's have some more conversations. Let's talk about this. Talk about more stuff. All you guys are building, guys and gals are building something cool. So I really want to make sure each of us connect and make sure we're working together to build a better future. So thanks for showing up, everybody.